There you go.
Stop horsing around, would you, Larry?
The meeting of the Public Safety Committee is now called to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd, Alderman Vaccaro,
Present.
Alderman Cone, Alderman Arnowitz,
Here.
Alderwoman Hubbard,
Present.
Alderman Kotar, Alderwoman Spencer,
Present.
Alderman Mohammed,
Here.
Alderwoman Boyd,
Present.
Chairman Kennedy,
Here.
Alderman Boyd, Alderman Cone, Alderman Kotar, 7 present, you have a quorum.
Cone is just stepping in.
8 present, you
All
have a
right then.
quorum. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry that we had to change the location. As you know, committee hearing is still going on over in the Kennedy room. And we did not want to take a gamble on how much longer that one was going to go. So we went ahead and just changed the venue to over here. We know that the accommodations are quite smaller. We're just doing our best that we can based upon the space that we have to use here today. We have 2 items on the agenda. The first one is very short. It just deals with the Prop S dollars. You should have a copy of this year's RFP for it. Also, a sheet that outlines the whole process from top to bottom, and then a review of past programs, or the programs that were funded for this year and their amounts, and a quick summary about what each one is doing. There's no vote to take on it. I just wanted to make sure that we formally began this process in the committee hearing. The first sheet outlines the entire process, and the first thing we need to do as a committee is to review the RFP and then agree upon what will be the RFP for for next year, for 2018. This year, we concentrated on the 15 neighborhoods that were identified in the crime prevention report, or study. What was it called?
Peer.
The peer group. And so we may consider that again for this year. Right now, I just wanted to get this before us formally in a committee hearing. And we'll bring it up again next week, giving you more time to review the RFP. Typically, we get the RFP out in October and then do the funding process through November and December to begin in January of the following year. Okay. I sent this out to us last week in email, but I know it's not like we have a big staff to review all.
Right.
Yes, sir. Alderman.
Mr. Chairman, the names that's on here that we're looking at, are these the organizations that have actually applied for this one coming up?
No, these are the ones that were funded this
Well,
year.
okay, this year, okay.
Since we have not released the RFP, there's no new
Okay, so there's
application.
no new ones, okay.
Alderwoman?
Mr. Chairman, has United Way been engaged to participate again this year? I noticed that's part of the RFP.
Yes.
They're a willing participant again in the evaluation process?
Yes. You know, they do help out each year.
Mhm.
Were there any questions on any of the material?
So are we making a motion or taking a vote on this today?
No, I just want to
Okay.
get it before.
I do think it would still be constructive to focus our energy on the peer
The spirit.
neighborhoods.
Mhm.
And, you know, I mean, a lot of those neighborhoods are the areas of the city where resources have been either eliminated or very finite for young people in particular. And, you know, since this is something that's supposed to focus on at-risk youth, I think there's probably no greater risk than the young people in those communities. And I think also the areas identified in the peer plan have some of the highest concentration of young people in the city as well.
As we know, these crime prevention dollars is really an attempt to affect change on the front end instead of the back end when crime is taken. Oftentimes, police efforts are on the back end after crimes have happened. The intent here is to begin to try to address the issues on the front end.
Be proactive.
Be proactive as opposed to, and that's a much longer range investment, a long time investment. So we do recognize 1 year of concentrating on those areas may not be enough to make the kind of change we're trying to affect. Okay. And this is a different approach to public safety and reducing crime. But all the reports that we had gotten, and including testimonies before this committee, said this is really one of the best ways to go. Alderwoman, you had a question?
Or after the funding is allocated, are we measuring the effectiveness of any of these programs, and how are we doing?
Well, The programs, once we have funded it through here, the Public Safety Office actually administers it, and so they do a summary and a report.
Oh.
And they get that, but, you know, we're still into 2017, so they won't
And they
have
forward
that.
us a copy of the.
They won't have that final one really closer
To the first of the year, perhaps.
no, they would have something more like late October,
Oh,
early November. Most of them, some run throughout the entire year, others are more focused in the summertime, but we'll get a summary from them. What we have in this one is just an overview of what the programs we're proposing to do. But what you're looking for is their effectiveness.
Right.
Alderman?
Mr. Chairman, last year we awarded $949,000. Two questions related to that. One being, do we know at this point, is there any carryover? Is all this money projected to be expended this year? I know in years past, there have been some sort of funds left on the table.
Right, right.
And then my second question would be, what are we projecting to issue this year? There have been issues in the past where this funding has been cut into, and are we fully funded this year, and what is that amount?
We'll have to find out about those funds that are left over from this year, that some programs might have not spent as much or underperformed. So I get that information from them. That's one of the things that they'll have a little bit later. We should be able to have that by our next meeting. The full amount for this year, do you know that? $950.
So around the same? that we
Around the
had
same
last
amount
year?
as
No
we did
increase,
last year.
decrease. And is that fully funded? Does that represent a fully funded PROPS?
No.
Or-
Well, yes,
Yeah, it does.
actually, because there's 50,000 that comes out for staff salaries for administration.
For administration.
Sure,
So the Prop S funds were $1 million when it was
Yes.
passed,
Mhm.
yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am, Alderman?
My question is, how are they coming up with the dollar amounts for these organizations to, award them those dollars amounts? How are we
This committee
coming
makes
up?
that decision.
Is it who?
This committee makes that decision.
Okay.
The way the ordinance was written, that the dollars are being be made available each year,
Mhm.
and the final decisions on them are made by the Public Safety Committee.
Okay, and I guess my concern is, it's not a concern, it's just kind of piggybacking on what, Alderman Hubbard said in regards to accountability and reports. And so, they receive the dollars when are they actually receiving dollars?
Well, when this committee finishes work, so we had it, they should have been, after this committee completes its work, then the Public Safety Office has to engage them in the contracts. I don't really think it was available till February of this year. February of this year. Would you identify, just so everybody does?
Yep, I'm Rebecca Hodge with the Director of Public Safety's office. I'm the program specialist who kind of administers the Prop S grant.
Okay, and so my question is, because from working with contracts and prior to my other life, I know that you normally have to give a report. So so does the organization give a report for dollars spent? And is it on a quarterly basis, monthly? How are they doing that?
It's a monthly basis right now that they actually submit invoices for, and it's on a reimbursement basis.
Okay.
So, they are allowed a startup for like the first month, they're allowed to spend a certain amount of money, to get the program started, but after that, it's reimbursement based.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Were there any other questions or comments? Alderman?
Just one, are we going to go through a similar process this year as we've gone through last year? Meaning, are you going to have a subcommittee of this committee that works with UN, United Way? Okay.
Right, we'll follow what we did in the past. Once they give them. Okay. So those, if you have not had a chance to go through this,
Oh, there it is, right
it is on there, but typically what to do is appoint a subcommittee that will go through all the applications with public safety, and make a recommendation back to the full committee.
Okay,
But any member is welcome to attend any of those subcommittee meetings also.
okay. So you pick who's on the subcommittee?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Oftentimes it's been who has the time and
Right, I
willingness
was
to
gonna
do
say,
it.
yeah.
So on occasion, I've had to draft some people as opposed to appoint them.
Okay.
Mhm, so,
I understand.
Those who talk the most get
I
drafted.
got you,
It'd be good to have some new blood on it. We actually had some new blood last year. Okay. All right, then, if there's no other questions on this, we will move on to our second agenda item. Last week, we had Major Mary Warnicke, I believe it's Warnicke, pardon me, to speak about the Force Investigative Unit and the whole process of dealing with officer-involved shootings and the investigation, just the whole process of the use of force policies with the St. Louis Police Department. We have here today our Circuit Attorney, Kimberly Gardner, and some of her staff to speak on the other portion of that, which her office is involved in, and then the relationship between the two. We wanted to hear from her. Many members wanted to hear from you here today, and we appreciate it. She did attend the last meeting, but we hadn't scheduled her to speak, but we have scheduled a specific time here today. If you would take the.
Chairman, you know the Force Investigation Unit Supervisor, Roger Inglehart, is here. I don't know if you have any questions for him, or is he coming after me? Just wanted to make sure you know.
No, we wanted them here. Where is he?
He's in the hallway, so I don't know
I
if you
didn't
want to
see him
speak to
at
him
all.
first.
No, we're ready
Okay.
for you.
Just letting you know.
That's for any other follow-ups. Perhaps if anything that you mentioned, we may need to ask further questions, we can do it then.
Thank you.
with that. I didn't see him here
He was in the hallway.
in the hallway. Okay.
She yelled at him, told him to stay out.
No, we're invited, the major here, she was unable to make it, so she sent. Okay. Would you officially identify yourself for the record and then?
Thank you, Chairman Kennedy. I am Circuit Attorney Kimberly Gardner, and thank you for the opportunity to address the Public Safety Committee and discuss the issues of officer-involved shootings. I believe we are at a crossroads in our city and nation's histories. Prosecutors, mayors, police chiefs, and community leaders like you across the nation are trying to determine how to investigate these issues in a manner that is fair and impartial, that promotes confidence in the criminal justice system when so many people, especially people of color, feel the system is rigged against them. Public trust is vital element for our criminal justice system to work effectively. The trust determines if the community will report crime, assist in holding wrongdoers accountable, and have confidence in our court's outcomes. Assuring a fair and impartial process for officer-involved shootings is central to establishing that trust. I will give you an overview today of the process of investigating officer-involved shootings and how it has evolved over the last several years. Prior to August 2014, the St. Louis Police Department Internal Affairs and Homicide Units investigated officer-involved shootings. The police alone determined if they themselves violated the law. They rarely asked prosecutors for a review, and when they did, they didn't recommend charges or bring proper evidence for prosecution. More often than not, myself, you, and your constituents were unaware of these incidents. Sometimes these events wouldn't even hit your radar screen unless there was a financial settlement from the city to a family of someone killed or injured by police. In 2014, under former Chief Sam Dotson, the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department launched the Force Investigation Unit. So going forward, I'm going to say FIU. This unit is charged with investigating officer-involved shootings. I'm going to say OIS, okay? To determine if any Missouri criminal laws have been violated by a police officer in a shooting incident which someone is injured or killed. When a suspect is shot, the Force Investigation Unit is called by officers on the scene, and the FIU assumes control of the investigation. These investigations have taken several months, or in many cases, years to complete. In 2014, after Kajeen Powell was shot and killed, the Circuit Attorney, Jennifer Joyce, agreed to review police department's investigations when they were finished. There were 2 officer-involved shootings from August through the end of 2014 that were sent to the Circuit Attorney's office. In response to the length of time these investigations were taken, when Mansar Ball-Bey was shot in August of 2015, Circuit Attorney Joyce announced she would begin a parallel investigation to help speed the process up. In 2015, there were 5 officer-involved shootings under review by the Circuit Attorney's office. And as a result, Ms. Joyce asked the Circuit Attorney for additional money and people to investigate these matters. She only received 1 additional attorney. That was it. In 2016, there were 8 more officer-involved shootings under review in our office, and police brought over the Anthony Lamar Smith case for review. That made for 16 cases in our office in 2 years. Ms. Joyce released her findings in 4 shootings, and the result was that no charges would be filed in those cases. I've been circuit attorney for 9 months, and we have had 14 officer-involved shooting cases. Since then, there has been at least 1 officer-involved shooting on an average every 3 weeks. Now we have a total of 25 open cases in our office. So from 2 to 8 to 16 to 25. I've watched the current system operate. Right now, the process we're using is not working. As honorable and ambitious as it was to think the officer conducted a parallel investigation, an independent investigation of officer-involved shootings with resources then and now, it is not possible. It is not possible when the police are the lead investigators in these incidents. Here are some of the challenges we have faced in both the previous administration and in mine. The St. Louis Police Department leading the criminal investigation into the conduct of its own employees is concerning. It is not the best practice to have a criminal investigation conducted by those subject to the investigation. The FIU's current policies lack objectivity and common sense principles that such an investigation requires. For example, currently officers are given 2 sleep cycles before they are officially interviewed by the FIU on an incident that has occurred. Last week, Major Warnke spoke before this committee and cited studies that proved this was the best way to get real information from officers. What do you think if we had the ability to solve crimes, if we gave every suspect 2 sleep cycles before every homicide or armed robbery case? How about a domestic violence case or a child sex abuse case? The research I've studied contradicts this practice. The FIU officers are also spending too much effort protecting officers as opposed to searching for the objective truth. For example, a few months ago, we had an officer in the warrant office who was involved in an officer-involved shooting case. He was there with a member of the FIU, and they were applying for charges on a suspect who was involved in the incident. When interviewed by one of my prosecutors, the officer tried to truthfully answer the questions about the details of the incident. And the FIU officer kept interrupting and would not let the police officer answer the questions. Despite the police officer's desire to share the truth with us so we could file charges against the suspect, the FIU officer would not permit it. One of the FIU officers actually stated and said that it was his duty to protect his fellow officers. This example leads to another serious issue for us. Officers are discouraged from cooperating with the prosecutions of suspects involved in officer-involved shootings. When called to grand jury to testify in a case against a suspect who has been charged in an officer-involved shooting, these officers are pleading the fifth, and they will not cooperate, which prevents us from pursuing charges against some dangerous people. This puts both the community and other police officers in danger because it is virtually impossible to prosecute a case like this without the cooperation of law enforcement and the officer involved. The cooperation between agencies is not what it should be. FIU only brings evidence, reports, and information over to our office if specifically asked by us. There are cases from 2015 and 2017 that we don't have any evidence that may have been closed by the police office. Unlike most cases we prosecute, when police reports are finished and evidence is processed, police send those to the prosecutor as a matter of routine. Not in these cases. Few things are sent over to us without the constant follow-up of our investigators to provide this important evidence. Actually, the police can decide what they send and when they send it. In some cases, we have no way of knowing if we have everything. To date, this summer, we have not received one completed FIU report that summarizes their findings. Not one. I've been told by police union attorneys, representatives, that they don't think that they can get a fair shake or an unbiased review of these cases. That simply is not true. The review process is fair for everyone else. So why is the process not fair when a police officer is subjected to the same review process? What evidence do they have that illustrates police officers can't get an objective review? If officers are telling the truth, they have nothing to fear. I asked the question, do you think officers should be treated differently? And I was told by police union representatives and defense counsel, yes. I'm pleading with you. No one is above the law, and we have to create a process that reflects that. So I'm proposing this before this committee. We must create an independent investigation bureau, a new unit within my office, solely dedicated with charging cases of police use of force, officer-involved shootings, and issues of conviction integrity. The CAO will lead the investigation and is in charge of all officer-involved shooting scenes. My office conducts all interviews of involved officers. Internal affairs investigation is suspended while the CAO is conducting our investigation. The CAO gathers evidence and directs the St. Louis Police Department ancillary to the process like evidence, labs, ETU, etc. We need dedicated resources, including 4 prosecutors, 5 investigators, and 2 support staff to create this unit. I will isolate this team from interfacing with the police department on general criminal cases to ensure objectivity so the public can be assured that prosecutors are not close to the police. The St. Louis Police Department officers cooperate with prosecutions of suspects involved in officer-involved shootings. First to the scene officers should be directed by my investigative bureau at the scene to bring cases to my office for review rather than FIU officers. The Police Officer Association has no influence over how the investigation is conducted and should be restricted to only representation of individual clients. The CAO identifies potential issues, ensures officers' constitutional rights are protected. As you know, officer-involved shootings are very difficult to prove, even with the best evidence. But we have an obligation to this community to hold police to a higher standard. And when an officer shoots someone, whether legal or otherwise, the public deserves to know about it. Both the community and the police deserve an objective, fair, and transparent investigation. And it is no longer acceptable for police to be essentially investigating themselves. The time is now to make the change. I am the only elected official whose sole responsibility is to keep the public safe. It is the duty of the local prosecutor to ensure that a complete, independent, and fair investigation is conducted. It is the duty of the local prosecutor to review evidence and bring charges when appropriate. To do this, I must have a fair and independent investigation. State and federal authorities only respond in rare and exceptional instances and cannot be relied upon as our local control option. Justice isn't getting the outcome the police or the public may want. Justice is pursuing the facts and the evidence and the law. Justice is making sure the process is working for all of us. I'm asking you for your support to help me secure the legal authority and resources needed to swiftly and fairly investigate these cases. I know there are better ways that we can do this together and make the system work for us all. And also, I want to close. I have a letter of support because this was created in response to these issues around the nation. And the leading person is George Gascon, District Attorney from San Francisco. So I have a letter of support directed to the Board of Aldermen explaining that they had the very same issues. And this is how they decided as a city, as a community, to create a unit like this. So show me that we can also be on the forefront to address these most serious cases that erode public trust in the whole criminal justice system. And I thank you.
Do you have more than one case? It's just
I
one
got
copy?
2, but I can make copies if you
Well, we
guys
can-
want. I
we
can
can
send it by
get the-
email also, too.
We can get the,
I'll do it.
you get it. Okay, good. Thank you for your testimony. We will now begin with some questionings from members of the committee. First, I'd like to recognize that we have Representative Bruce Franks here, also in here. I don't believe there's any other elected officials in the office. I know everyone is important, but I'd like to identify our state representative. We'll first go to Alderman Cone. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions for you, the recommendations seem reasonable and way past due. Now, can you go through the staffing recommendation? You said, I think, 5 attorneys or?
What I said is 5 investigative officers. Basically, they were to be the investigative body that takes the place of the FIU. So there'll be 5 individuals. Then we'll have 4 prosecutors who will also lead in the investigation, analyzing the law and evidence to decide, consulted by myself, whether to pursue charges, criminal charges in these cases.
Is that just those 9?
And two support staff, sorry.
And do you have a budget idea in terms of how much that would cost?
We want to have at least 0.1% of the total police budget to support this unit on an annual basis.
What, do you know the number?
I think they're about 136 million, so 1.3 million.
So some of the things that you stated, I'm just curious, local versus state law. You know, you're elected by city voters, but you're a county office holder. So I'm curious, as a county office holder, do you have the authority to intercede in those investigations? So you were saying that, your office, in the past underneath the previous administration had investigated after, the FIU had already done their investigation, and now it's running concurrently with their investigations when, they provide you with information. Does your office have the authority underneath state law to kind of usurp their investigation?
Well, that's why I think and that's a good question, and sorry to cut you off, but I think it's local control as the police department, and now as the local prosecutor, is for you guys to give this unit the ability and the legal authority to conduct these investigations. And I think that's what other areas like San Francisco, they've done, and their Board of Aldermen has given them the legal authority to do those things.
But do you not have that authority right now underneath state law?
We can, I believe that we have the ability to investigate, but we don't have the ability to do a thorough investigation as the police. And so what we're asking is something different. We want to have our own investigative body directed by the Circuit Attorney's Office, that the evidence is collected and controlled at the time of the scene. So that is different. We go to the scenes now, but we can't control the scene. So the police can choose to let us in or not, and they have let us go to the scenes. They let us take certain things, but we can't control collection of evidence. We can't, in some instances, depending on who's at the scene or who has a good working relationship, say, hey, I think that's important or not. But that's what we need to map out, and I think I believe I do have the legal authority to investigate, but like I said, normally we have not done that. So we need to establish this protocol so we can do these things.
Okay. So is it your belief or understanding then that locally we would change how FIU is reporting, or if they even do report, officer-involved shootings over to you, or how, I'm just like process-wise,
But when you create
how
this,
would that work?
when you create this independent body, then we were the ones that are go to the scene. FIU, at the discretion of the police department, can still be in existence, but their role is limited in these cases. If you guys agree under this structure that I'm creating, that we do these things. And then that's when we get into, different memorandums of understanding and different issues that we can work out later. But in terms of how we are controlling the scene, I believe we can do that if you guys agree to, one, give us the investigative capacity as well as the manpower to do these things, because we are taking over the investigation, we are controlling the scenes. Then we are actually, if FIU, depending on the police chief or however their internal structure decides, which they probably will keep them, will be the go-between to help us, one, take certain evidence to the lab. They can be ancillary, they can still be there, but in a different limited capacity.
So, what you're suggesting is, as soon as an officer fires a weapon, regardless if there's a killing or not, that the scene then becomes the purview of the circuit attorney's office and not the police?
Yes.
Okay.
With the help of the police, and other jurisdictions have cooperation with the police, but they know that we control the scene and the investigation at that time.
And so currently, when there is an officer-involved shooting, are you all made aware of that? And do you have investigators that are at the scene when
Yeah.
that occurs?
Yes, right now, we are made aware. We have a pager we carry. The person carries 24/7. So anytime there is an officer-involved shootings, we are alerted. We respond to the scene, and we have an investigator that goes also. So we do that right now.
And so right now, there's an investigator and a CAO, a deputy CAO that goes to the scene, but they're not investigating what happens. The police are doing
The police are controlling the investigation, so they kind of, depending on, like I said, who was there at the time, they can allow us to take pictures that we need. We also interview witnesses that we can talk to. Sometimes we don't have anything, so we're kind of looking at what the police are doing and who we may need to talk to. We sometimes learn about the public safety statement initially, but we have to do our follow-up as when things are happening, because at the time, they're busy controlling the scene. And sometimes that flow of information is not readily available to us. So that's why we Jennifer Joyce tried to inject herself as a parallel investigation, because we're basically waiting for the completed investigation of the FIU, and that could take years. If we have this right now where we control the scene, the police can be a part of it, but they're not investigating that scene, they're not controlling the scene. And I think that we can have a faster result, a faster outcome, and dispose of these cases better in this way.
So I'm wondering as well, would your office, because, let's say that there's, a pursuit of a known criminal, and there is an officer-involved shooting, but, or a group of individuals that are known criminals, as sometimes happens. There's an officer-involved shooting, but, maybe there was a drug transaction that was occurring, or another homicide or a domestic violence situation that escalated. If you all are controlling the scene, are you also investigating the crime that may have transacted at the same time?
That's a very good question. What this unit would do is to address some of the issues in terms of even the concept we have now. We're supposed to separate the actual officer-involved shootings from an incident where the suspect has a criminal investigation or a criminal charge that we can pursue. So the regular warrant office or regular prosecutors will handle those cases, but in terms of just the officer-involved shooting cases, this unit will handle that, not the criminal incident. So that's how we separate those.
But there would be additional resources there to also
Yes.
address the criminal incident that may have been happening at that point in time as well?
Yes.
Okay. So in your opening statement, you suggested that the police haven't been forthcoming with some information.
No.
As the circuit attorney, are you not compelled under any state law to, you all have subpoena power yourself in your office, correct?
Yeah,
So
but-
are you able to exercise that to compel them to turn over information?
I mean, yeah, we have to get to that, but the problem is, like in any investigation, the police usually turn over information as it's coming. Right now, we don't even get that, so we don't even know what to subpoena, when to subpoena, because we are limited in what information we receive. We may know about the incident, but of course, you have to work with the Force Investigation Unit, and they're controlling the investigation. We wanna start using that subpoena tool if they're gonna turn over certain things later on, but we don't know. The problem is the improper and bias, to me, of police unit investigating themselves. That's the central theme of this. It doesn't matter if the force investigation is doing the job well. I'm not saying they're not doing the job well, but the bias of an organization of officers who are basically gonna find criminal charges against one of their friends. I mean, in any other cases where a defendant's able to get a group of their friends to go investigate the scene and turn it over to me. It's never gonna happen. So I think we have to look at these no different as any other case. And right now, we are looking at these differently. And we need to, as a community, look at how we can build trust in the criminal justice system. And regardless, these cases are hard, no matter what, even with this new unit. It's not gonna guarantee any outcome from police or the community, but at least we can say we had a fair and independent investigation, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah, and to be clear, I agree with you. And I am curious, your interpretation with the new state law that passed, I think they call it the Thin Blue Line Bill. How do you think that impacts your ability to investigate, or in some cases prosecute these cases?
I mean, it doesn't affect my ability. I mean, those laws are specific to incidents that were created by the legislator. So we look at those separately, like we look at any other violation under the state law. But that has no impact on my ability to prosecute officer-involved shooting cases.
I'm sure there's a ton of committee members that have questions, so I don't want to monopolize the time, and I can certainly ask more of mine later.
Sure.
But thank you for coming down
Thank
and
you.
providing your testimony, and I might have questions for later if
Okay.
I'm not asked.
We'll
But
plan on making more.
I don't want to monopolize the time. It's the privilege of being a senior alderman, and certainly want some of the.
You finally admitted.
Yes.
You've
Yes.
You've joined the ranks of the seniors. Alderman Waterwoods?
Thank you, Ms. Gardner, for finding time to come over. So you feel like this will help the process by having your own independent investigation unit. And I get it. I agree with you on that, believe me. So currently, if there's a shooting, let's just say a shooting happened right now, someone notifies your office. So under what you want to do, then I think what you're trying to say is, well, the police mark this area off, but let's don't touch anything till the investigative unit gets here. So basically let you come in, or your investigators, look at the scene, what you think's important and everything else. And then would the police, like, I guess, make their own narrative and write what they want, and then collectively, I guess, somewhere you come together and compare, or?
Well, the police still, and like I said, internally, I can't control internally
Right.
what they choose to do. The police can still have their own investigation of whatever, but it's gonna be directed by this new investigative body, directed by my office. So the roles will switch.
Okay.
So instead of me waiting for what evidence they decide to bring over to me whenever they want, now it's my time to decide after I do a complete investigation, and we can even say, at the same time, turn over things to the police, and they can also do their own independent investigation under their authority. But the one thing that's changing here is the police will have to notify our office. If the responding officer goes to the scene, they would know that they would have to, they have to kind of, like you said, control the scene.
Right.
But at the same time, they have to wait for the investigative body from our office, and they have to control the evidence. They have to direct, look at this, take a picture over here, collect samples over here. That is for us to direct, not the Force Investigation Unit. Now, they can work with us,
Right.
but we are directing what evidence that we choose is important or not, or what's not important.
Right. And then also let me ask you this, so, I mean, why do you think in your honest opinion and, why your office is waiting for reports a year later? I mean, that's,
You have to ask the police department. I mean, I can't speak to that. I don't
Okay.
control the evidence, I don't control, I mean, and this is not an attack on the police department or the force investigation unit. I mean, we know certain pieces of evidence take time. These cases are very complex. That's why 25 cases is like really 70 cases, because they take time, you have to interview different people, you have to deal with many different issues. So even if we have this investigative body, there still would take time. But I think the importance of this is sending a message to the community as well as police officers about accountability and transparency, that something is being done. Too many times I get calls from families who say, what is going on? And I honestly tell them, look, it's a current investigation. I know about the incident, but at this time, I'm basically waiting on things, and I cannot speak to give them, you can't give them comfort in these issues.
Right.
But you would think that it's my duty as a sole elected official who is charged with public safety to be able to answer these questions for these grieving families. That causes stress and anger in the communities that we're seeing right now. And if we have to, as a city, have accountability, and I think that it's not a slap on law enforcement, it's not a slap on anybody, it's saying in this new way and accountability that the public has been asking post-Ferguson, we have to answer the calls of doing something different. And this is doing something different. And this is accountable to everybody.
and then I think you would agree that it gives people in St. Louis, in the city here, more comfort there's a more independent investigation. No matter what the outcome may be, but that you've at least had a hand in it with your unit and did your investigation.
It's, all I can guarantee is a fair process.
Right.
I can't guarantee, like you said,
Right,
the
exactly,
outcome.
and
And I think
that-
that we have to do that.
and
And I
that's what
agree
I'm
with what you're
saying.
saying. Yes, sir.
And then, now, Ms. Gardner, and I know currently you're probably, right now, I know you're understaffed, I think, with prosecutors right now. And so, with this scenario, you want to add, and I think the Alderman came to, was it a total of 11?
It's 4 investigators, yeah, 11, well, 12 people, 4 investigators, no, 4 prosecutors, 5 investigators, and 2 support staff. But the issue with this seat, you know, I understand that people wanna say turnover in my office is the cause of this. And I understand that. One may think that from the outside, but really, this office, this unit has been underfunded before I took office. 1 person and 1 investigator is not enough to deal with these complex cases. So we simply need more resources to do the very complex work that these cases need.
So, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't even realize that's all you had was 1 investigator.
Well, the city thankfully gave us only 1 funding source for an attorney. We take an investigator that existing has other cases and other caseloads to help us with these cases. So we're asking for an investigative support that we
Right.
have not had. So we only had really 1 position, not an investigator and a prosecutor position.
And it makes it hard for you to really do your job effectively under that scenario.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I agree with your concerns, and I think we as a city need to implement something, and because everyone deserves, you know, an honest answer after everything. And I agree with you on this, and I would like to see it, and I think your independent investigators do that, and hopefully the police, and whatever the outcome, and hopefully one way or the other, it comes in agreement, no, whatever it is. And sometimes, and I get it, you're the prosecuting attorney, you catch a lot of heat because people feel this wasn't right and that wasn't right, and I don't envy your job, I'll be honest with you, but you're a very strong person, so I do appreciate that, and I'll be quiet, and thank you again for coming over, I
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Alderman.
Alderwoman Hubbard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, and of course, Circuit Attorney Ms. Gardner. I'm grateful that you were able to come here today to kind of let us know what's going on. I have a few questions, and then some I have for you, Mr. Chairman, because I know you may know a little bit more about our budget process and how we could possibly make this happen. But I know that we met before, and you spoke to some of your staff being cut. I think it would be important for you to speak to that publicly, so prior to us even getting here, just to let us know kind of what you started with as the circuit attorney of the city.
In these cases, or,
Just budget-wise, just staff support, I think it's important that you,
well, I mean, as you guys know, and you guys have been here probably before, I've only been here 9 months in the city, and I have many young statesmen here around me that have been here for over decades. Jennifer Joyce has asked for 16 years while in office to fund our office appropriately. We are the only entity in law enforcement that has been cut historically every year. Right now, we have the police that operate at 136 million and steadily rising, but we have a budget of about $7.1 million and only 60 attorneys. We, out of the 115 municipalities around the state of Missouri, we try more cases, we prosecute more cases than any other jurisdiction. So when you look at the shift in crime, we look at how violent crime is rising continuously on a day-to-day basis. Last year alone, we had 188 murders. So people think that, okay, you know, you only have so many attorneys with the experience and know-how to address those most serious cases. They need to be experienced. You can't pick an attorney from a civil world and say, now try a murder case. That's simply not appropriate, and we're not doing the community of the city of St. Louis justice. So it takes a more experienced person with many years of trial experience. And to attract those people, I mean, we have a starting salary of $40,000. So you talk about turnover, people think because I came in office, in any of the prosecutor's office around the country that has change in leadership, there's transition because you have a new vision, you have a new way you're moving the office, and it's up to like-minded people to decide to move on or to stay in that organization. So that does not reflect me or the office, but we have to look at the constraints that this office has been placed on before I took office. Funding is key. When you have attorneys who from day one try more cases than any other person in any jurisdiction, as a St. Charles, even St. Louis County, we have misdemeanor attorneys who try over 5 to 6 cases. We have felony attorneys that are already at 15. And then they get snatched up to get a 6-figure salary by a civil firm that has less stress and more opportunity. So you're gonna always have turnover, and turnover has always been the issue with this office. But now we have to look at how we attract a more senior attorney to deal with the most violent crime, because crime right now we're at the spectrum of more violent crime, and we're having less of the nonviolent crime. And we need the staff to do that. So I've asked, as well as Jennifer Joyce and probably circuit attorneys previous to her, have always asked for more resources. But we can tell when you fund one entity of law enforcement differently than another, then you have problems. And so that's what we're dealing with. And we've been dealing with that for decades, and we're gonna continue to deal with those limited resources. But that is not a deterrent to me doing my job or the good people in my office pursuing justice, no matter what. And they are doing that. They're overworked, but we support them, and they're dedicated to the community.
thank you, and I totally agree with you on that. Specifically in regards to the 1.3 million, you spoke of it possibly coming from the police budget, but Mr. Chairman, is there any way that some of those funds can be recouped from somewhere else within our budget? So if in fact this does happen, which I believe it should happen, it wouldn't put a unnecessary strain on our police officers' budget?
In answer to your question, it could be identified from another pot of money that's in the budget. It doesn't necessarily have to come out of the police budget.
And also, as far as creating this independent investigative unit, giving her the authority to do that, legislatively, what does that process look like coming through the Public Safety Committee? I mean, how will we shape that to give her the additional support that she needs, and to also make sure that we're being transparent in our city in regards to officer-involved shootings?
There would have to be there would just have to be a bill introduced. It would most likely be assigned to this committee. And there are several ways that could work. It could be, from my understanding, a bill and an ordinance, or it could even be a charter change. It depends on which direction we want to go with it.
And specifically legally, like, because when she talks about she'll go on the scene and they're withholding information and stuff. I would like to see that like move through a legal framework to make sure that she's being able to access information that she can, but of course without impeding her process, but just to make sure that we're above board on everything that we're asking.
Well, I mean, the bill could be specific enough to give her the authorities that she was seeking to be able to do an independent and separate investigation from the police. That can be outlined in the bill.
Just want to clarify, there's not change like in internal affairs reviews or civilian review board process. Those processes can still take place, but only after a completed investigation by our office. So we just ask that at the time, the internal affairs investigation is suspended.
That's what I was gonna ask.
No further questions.
Thank you. Alderman Coulter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologize for being late. We're having a thrilling discussion about horse-drawn carriages across the hall. And so, I'm a little late to the party here, Madam Circuit Attorney. So you're proposing, I don't know if I'm gonna make sure I understand this, basically setting up, similar to San Francisco here, an independent investigation bureau comprised of a couple of attorneys, some investigators, and some support staff, is that right?
Yes,
Costing roughly 1.3 million a year.
yes.
So, I guess you'd still, so walk me through this, and if there was an officer-involved shooting, let's say a fatal shooting, your folks would show up on the scene, would they control the scene?
They would control the scene,
Okay, for every fatal involved shooting,
yes.
won't that take more than, I mean, I've had the unfortunate experience of going to police-involved shooting scenes and not just regular homicide scenes. Isn't it gonna take more than that number of people to control a scene?
Well, right now, the Force Investigation Unit is only 4 investigators with 1 lieutenant. So I'm
Right.
basically basing the structure off of that 5 investigator structure that they have.
But
plus-
you're relying on the police department and district officers and others to block streets, control access, conduct canvasses of the neighborhood under the current system, right?
But even with this, they still can be a part of helping us ancillary, but we would control the scene with the help if we see fit of a district officer to do certain things directed by our investigation bureau. So we still would have support of the police department, but we would make sure we control that initial scene. So they can help us with the ancillary collection of evidence, the ETU, doing all the things with the lab. We can't create that. We have to use them for that. So the
Okay.
Force Investigation Unit could, depending on the internal and structure that they decide, if we decide that you guys decide that we can do this, they still will be a part of assisting, but it's assisting, not directing and controlling.
But to be clear, so see, the crime lab, the ballistics, all those guys would still be, you'd still be relying on
Yes.
those existing police department
Yes,
resources?
I would.
Okay. And so I guess in a fatal shooting, if you show up and control the scene, I guess potentially that could work. What about the instances where we have a non-fatal officer-involved shooting and potential criminal charges of the individual shots facing? How will that work where you have both the criminal investigation of the individual shot by police plus your separate investigation? Who controls the scene in that circumstance?
Well, in any, whether fatal or non-fatal, it's still officer-involved shooting.
Right.
So we would control that investigation. But at the same time, if there is an incident where that defendant has to be charged for a criminal issue, then at that time, we would direct a regular police officer to take that incident, write it up, and submit it to our warrant office as we normally submit any criminal case against a suspect. And they would do that through the regular system. But we still would be there at the scene. Like I said, the police department will be there also. So it's a way that this body can help separate that issue from the officer-involved shooting incident, even though it's related. But I think that we have to do those.
Okay, but I mean, in that instance, if you have if there's an incident that leads to a non-fatal officer-involved shooting, and you've got a criminal suspect who's potentially shot and an officer, so your office is investigating, I guess, handling the investigation into the officer-involved shooting, plus we potentially have a separate criminal act. If that detective needs additional evidence, do they have to get that from your office?
Well, they will be there, and then that's the point where we can talk to the police department and how we would branch that off with our office directing that investigation to say, okay, with regards to this suspect in this incident for criminal charges, then you do X, Y, and Z. We can talk and negotiate that between the departments. But as you stand now, that's a good question. The Force Investigation Unit investigates both those cases, and they present both those cases to our office. So why is it any different when my office is doing that versus what they currently do already? There's not been an issue in terms of when they come down with a suspect case and the officer-involved shooting case.
Right.
So they don't separate this case internally, so I think that it's up for us in terms of, I think the separation should be in terms of how we prosecute and how it's presented, because regardless of who controls the scene, the Force Investigation Unit now controls any officer-involved shootings, no matter what. And if we can control the scene, that's not saying that somehow this issue is going to skew the officer-involved shooting portion. It's related. But I think in how we present it to the warrant office, I think a prosecutor who, as you know, you worked in the office, who is there currently, can review those issues as a criminal case against that suspect. And I think that's how we branch those off. But in terms of the investigation, if it's independent in dealing with these issues, right now the Force Investigation does both of these cases, and there's no problem. But there is a problem in terms of how, when they presented these cases to our office, that there are basically not allowing police officers to truthfully testify and give us the information so we can even pursue a case on those cases.
Right, and I've heard instances where you've had officers who are, you know, if you're the officer involved in the shooting, you're probably the primary witness because you were likely the first one there, or they've invoked their Fifth Amendment rights based on the fact that, well, yes, they're the witness of an incident that they're seeking that the police department seeking criminal charges on, they're also potentially a suspect in a criminal case, and that can get a little messy.
But these cases are messy anyway because they
Right.
may have multiple and complex issues. But like I said to police officers, if a suspect, for example, basically had a gun and we issue a case, what conflict or what issue would the police officer have if this person actually had a weapon, actually said they shot a weapon or had a flourish a weapon, and we had criminal charges against that individual? Wouldn't that make that officer-involved shooting case stronger?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you
So
there.
what's the conflict? The conflict is what is the truth? We need to seek the truth in these instances. And these instances do not happen in this need only an officer-involved shooting versus a criminal incident. So we have to, as a city, come to a realization that these are complex, but at some point, we have to seek the truth. My problem is, in those examples, we do have witnesses, and they come in with the police union officers, and they all plead the fifth, even witnesses not involved in the officer-involved shootings. So I can't issue any criminal charge on anyone when there are witnesses. So basically, what we're saying is people who shoot at police officers, we let them go because it's an officer-involved shooting case open. And we're talking about people who are not even involved, they're witnesses to what happened. So everybody's pleading the fifth, not just the officer involved in the actual shooting. Everyone.
All the other, okay, interesting. So with the current, and I missed this, I think you may have touched on this before I got here. I know the Force Investigation Unit has finalized, I guess, a number of their reports and sent them to your office. How many of those do you have, I guess, in the Circuit Attorney's office currently?
Currently, you have about 16 reports. We're looking at completing we have a total of 25.
25.
We have I know we have 14 reports since I took office that we have no reports, so they're not finalized. So 14.
Right.
And then we have 4 that were previously completed by Jennifer Joyce, and we're looking to complete some more soon. But right now, we have a lot of these cases that we don't even have reports, so.
Right, but the ones you do have reports on, there's 25? I wasn't following the math there.
It's
How many?
25, it's 25 total. I know 14 of those, we do not have reports.
Okay. So for the, I guess, 11 that you do have reports on, that you've gotten, I guess, a Force Investigation Unit report, is someone in your office currently reviewing those?
Yes, they are reviewing those.
Okay, and is that an attorney or an investigator or both?
It's both.
Okay, and are they ultimately going to make a final charging decision on those 11, whether or not to charge or not charge?
Well, I'm gonna say, we don't have all the reports on all the 11 we have. To the best of my knowledge, we have about 4 cases that could potentially be closed, and that's what we're looking at right now. But we don't have everything in all these cases, all these 11, so we have a report, but there's still other evidence that may be missing.
And have you guys, I mean, has that evidence been requested of the police department?
Yes, it has.
And have they haven't provided it?
No, they get to provide it whenever they feel it's important.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean they get to provide it when they believe it's
I'm not the
important?
Force Investigation Unit. You gotta ask them about they get to control the investigation and control what they turn over. So, I mean, I can't make them, I mean, we can ask, and we've asked. I mean, we can say, hey, we need this, but they determine what they wanna turn over when. So that's the problem.
Okay. It seems shocking to me that the police department would not be turning over evidence that the circuit attorney's office is requesting. If that's the case, that's
Well, it shocked
particularly
me, I got
troubling.
14 since I took office in January, and I have no report, so it's more shocking to me than anybody else.
Well, okay, but we talked about, you mentioned this earlier, these are complex investigations. I could certainly see an officer-involved shooting investigation taking 6 months or more. I mean, whether you were conducting the investigation or the force investigation unit, would you agree with that?
Well, I agree that these are complex cases, although I can't put a time limit, nor
Right.
am I trying to put a time limit on there. But in terms of how the flow of evidence is basically given to our office, I think that there should be some kind of working relationship that's established in a cohesiveness to address these issues in a compatible way that makes all of us happy. You know, we're just looking to seek the truth.
Right.
These cases are hard. We can't make up what we don't have. We can't, I mean, you're putting an elected official who is the sole responsibility of public safety, and I can't even tell victims the status of their cases. So what do you think that does for me in terms of how people look at this office about how we are accountable and transparent to the whole community? Even for police officers want to get on with their lives.
Right.
But at some point, we have to stop this rhetoric of them against us and start working together.
Yeah,
And I think that's the rhetoric that I'm trying to work together, and I am guided by the laws of the state of Missouri. Kim Gardner or no other circuit attorney can make up any laws or evidence. And I think that we have to look at why is this process, when it comes to a police officer, somehow we have to have this different process. We don't have a different process for defendants. We don't have a different process when I have victims who become defendants. Everybody under this law has been subjected to the same process. And all of a sudden now, because you're a police officer, your occupation means that somehow you should be above the law? No, sir. I don't think so. I know you're not saying that.
No,
But this
I'm
is what
certainly
our
not saying
community
that.
has to address. But we have to have real conversations that it's not a pro-police or against police. It's doing the right thing.
Right.
And it's doing the right thing. And it's doing the right thing means, you know what? If I had the neat and answers to your questions like you want, I would love to have that. But guess what? I'm giving you bits and pieces like I've gotten since I took office.
I get it. And so, I mean, like it or not, I mean, your office and the police department are going to be working together for the foreseeable future, right? I mean, they are the chief law enforcement agency in the city. You are the chief prosecutor in the city. The vast majority of criminal cases that people apply on come from that office. I mean, some from the highway patrol. I know that's a whole separate deal, but I mean, you guys got to work together one way or the other.
I agree with that.
Right? So, and I get this is messy. There is no easy answer. And San Francisco's come up with a plan, it looks like, but ultimately they are going to get treated differently. You know, you just mentioned about why should these guys be treated differently. I mean, there has to be some sort of differentiation between your average run-of-the-mill criminal investigation and a police investigation, because ultimately the investigative authority is usually with the police department, right? They're going to be under the current system. They're investigating themselves. You're saying that's creating some issues of trust, and I get that. So what I'm saying is, since you guys are always going to have to be working together, you're always going to have the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department working with the Circuit Attorney's Office and vice versa. Would it make sense to use a different law enforcement agency to handle these incidents, of which we're talking about? I don't know. I mean, how many officer-involved shootings were there last year? Like 15, 17?
There were 16.
16? I was close. Would it make sense to use, I guess, a separate investigative agency and a separate, like the Attorney General's office, for example, to investigate these 17 cases, so you guys can keep working together on the, thousands of other criminal cases that you guys need to be partners on, basically?
Well, that's a comment and a question all at the same time. It has
It is
many
both.
different.
Yeah. Sorry. I guess
but-
I'd like to know what you think about using the AG's office for some of this.
I am the sole elected official accountable for public safety in this local jurisdiction. So you're saying that I, as a local prosecutor who was held accountable for the people who elected me, cannot prosecute these cases?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm simply asking what you think
But
about
that's what
using
you're
the
saying when you
AG's
say,
office.
let's go to the attorney generals. The attorney generals are basically not accountable. I'm the only one accountable to the public in this local jurisdiction. And we have to not look at, you know, only in very, basically exceptions are federal government or the states, the general attorney, even in these cases, under a rare exception. And if you look at the tenet of how these other offices look to the local prosecutor to handle their own issues, you're basically saying that I'm somehow put in this position that I can't do my job, that people put me in this position to do. So I've said this to the police union, that's offensive, and I take offense. And I know you're not meaning it in an offensive way, but basically you're saying I'm not doing my job or I can't do my job.
I prefer if you didn't put words in my mouth, Kim. I'm simply asking the question about whether or not there's a different framework we could look at. I'm not saying it's a better solution. I have no idea. You're the circuit attorney, not me. You got elected. I have the utmost faith that you can do your job, and I didn't suggest otherwise.
But I'm saying, like you said,
if I
I'm
could finish.
the elected prosecutor. I'm saying I'm giving you an option, and the option is to give me the tools to do these things effectively and appropriately. And if and when I do these type of investigations that is needed, then at that point I can make a decision if I need to, an exception, turn something over to the federal government or the attorney general. But at that time, I get the first bite because that's what people put me in this position. I'm not going to shirk my responsibilities to kick the can to somebody else. That's not what I'm elected to do. My job, like I do any other time, and I'm not directing this at you, so please excuse me if you think I'm saying it's you, but this conversation I've had with many people, and I understand it's easy to say, kick it over to somebody else. That's my responsibility. I have to make the tough calls. And guess what? I'm gonna be accountable for whatever decision that I'm called to make, whether it's to issue a criminal charge in these cases or not. Just like I look at any other defendant,
Right.
I make a charge every day. So I don't think that police should be looked at differently. And no one is above the law, specifically police officers who they have the job and the title to enforce laws on everybody else. And somehow we're saying that we can't hold them accountable. And I just basically say that the conversation of kicking the can, we can no longer do this because the federal government, they're not gonna do it. And the attorney general is not gonna do it because that's not their purview. They look to the local enforcement agency, and only in rare exceptions will they step in if we ask.
Okay. So I guess, ultimately this gets down to an issue of public trust. Yes, we need to come up with a framework going forward, but we also have these, this town just dealt with an incident that occurred in 2011, right? We're dealing, who knows how many more, Anthony Lamar Smith, Jason Stockley type situations we have in those 25 plus cases that are sort of floating out there. So while I certainly agree that we need to come up with a system going forward, I'm really concerned about all these cases, this sort of backlog of police-involved shootings that, a decision has not yet been made, whether to charge them or, issue a determination that no charges are going to be brought against the officers. So what are we doing to get through that backlog?
Well, that's why I want to create this option. Because like I said, I didn't create the backlog. I'm only as good as what is turned over to me. If
Right.
nothing is turned over to me, I can't make decisions. So if I have no evidence, how can I, as a prosecutor, make decisions on cases that are not completed? So I think that that's where we have to address as a city, so we can address this. And if you look at George Gascon, I don't know if you guys know his background. He was a former police chief. He was trained under William Bratton. He was a police chief for a long time and became the district attorney in San Francisco. So he has both police as well as prosecutor experience. He also took over after Kamala Harris. So this individual, basically a former police officer, worked himself through the ranks, spent over 30 years directing the San Francisco PD, saw that this works for his own organization in which he came from. I think we need to say this is an option that everyone should get on board, because we're in a time right now. I know the frustration that you feel with these cases. We're in a time of criminal justice reform. The community post-Ferguson has called for the attorneys to do something different, the prosecutor's office, the community, elected officials, as well as the police department. And so now we're at that time that we have to do something. And even if you read this letter, George Gascon, with all the resources and all the influence and all the ability his office probably has over our office, he basically said this is the only way. in dealing with these cases, because he had a backlog that's even more than this, because guess what? Even someone who comes from the same training experience, they still wouldn't turn over cases as in his office. So this is not a new phenomenon in my jurisdiction. This is around the country, and now it's up for St. Louis to show the community how we move forward. And I think this is the right time to address the concerns of having another Anthony Lamar Smith or any case, because people want a transparent and accountable process that regardless of the outcome, we're able to give the community what they want, as well as officers, an objective and fair investigation. I think that's only fair for everybody. It works for all of us. And it makes sure that the person who's accountable is me, who was elected in this position, and will not shirk her responsibilities to somebody else.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Spencer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner, for being here today. I think this is a really pertinent conversation. I don't think anybody can argue that we are in our city is in a crisis, a trust crisis. And this is not a crisis that affects small, it's not a special interest crisis. This is an issue that affects the majority of the city of St. Louis. We have got to figure out how to trust our police department again, all of us. And I don't think that it's a question that the folks involved in these shootings should be those investigating. There is clearly a conflict there, and one that results in a lack and furthers a lack of trust in our community. So I appreciate this looking at other options. Can you walk us through, is it typical for a prosecuting attorney's office to conduct investigations? Something that is really not clear to me from doing the research I've done is what are best practices nationwide, and how do we conduct review of police-involved shootings in a general, nationally?
Well, I mean, as I said, this issue with officer-involved shootings started with ground zero after the Mike Brown incident. So that spurred the conversation of how we're looking at these cases. And jurisdictions across the country have looked at many ways. Some people talked about independent investigators, independent prosecutors to look at these cases. Some people said, no, we need an independent investigation. Well, when I took office, I looked at the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, who are major cities around this country, and they recommend, at the very least, you have an independent investigation. And that is the true gold standard of handling these cases. Mm-hmm. Now, most prosecutors believe, and I think it's up to the discretion of that local prosecutor, whether they want an independent prosecutor person looking at these cases. But for the most part, they believe, and other colleagues around this nation who I've consulted with, they believe that they can do their job with a true independent and fair investigation. And I think that's what we need to look to. So this is a conversation that started. And Jennifer Joyce, prior to me taking office, because even in Kansas City is a different process. So we are kind of on the forefront of how we handle these cases. And now I'm trying to take the baton and move it further to the best practices, which, common sense, you shouldn't be investigating yourself. Just like a prosecutor in charge of my office, we wouldn't prosecute that case. We would send that to someone else to look at and evaluate, because our biasness could be in with that person in terms of how we charge or giving that person a chance. It's not saying we have bad intentions. It's just taking out that appearance of bias that can creep up.
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that we have essentially three options here. We can continue to have the police department under the FIU continue to conduct its own investigations. We can hand the investigations or give some level of control to the Circuit Attorney's Office, or we can have a complete, separate, independent review. Is that kind of my understanding of, that's my understanding of generally accepted practices to investigate police-involved shootings nationwide. If there are other options, I'm unaware of them. But
I mean, that's up to the local jurisdiction and the needs of the area. I defer that we need to have our own independent investigative body directed by the Circuit Attorney's Office, because that allows accountability, transparency, and that allows us to evaluate the case and the evidence we need to whether we pursue criminal charges or not. And I think that's what we need.
So the prosecutors would be essentially, under your proposal, would be essentially special prosecutors only investigating police-involved shootings.
They would investigate no other cases.
No
but
other
that.
cases. exist on call. So for example, if there's an incident at 3 a.m., they are going to be on call to be there, and they will.
24/7. They're on call right now, 24/7.
One of the frustrations that we had in our last hearing, kind of looking at the way we currently do things, is that the policies directing the police department and the circuit attorney's office, they're not immediately available to the public. My first question is, are the current policies that the circuit attorney's office is using to conduct police-involved shootings, investigations, are those policies public? Or are they, where are the policies, do we have access to them, and does the public?
Well, the first thing is, the force investigation unit is separate from the circuit attorney's office.
Sure.
As you know, the history, we kind of injected ourselves in the conversation. So as this landscape I talked about of how we handle these cases has been developed over our times of what we need to better look at these cases and evaluate these cases. So we do have internal policies, like we go to the scenes, like we're on call 24 hours. We try to have a good working relationship and say, hey, we take a picture of this. We interview witnesses on the scene. We look at how volatile the scene is. Sometimes the police are talking and we see people that they may need an interview. We go and talk to. We knock door to door. So we currently have developed our own policies. But like I said, when you don't control the investigation, it's hard to create policies that are effective to release to the public when the investigation is basically still directed and controlled by the FIU unit.
Do we currently have policies in place? I'm curious just because.
I mean, I have internal policies that my one prosecutor as well as investigator kind of knows, but I haven't made that available to the public.
I think
But I can get you a sample of what we do.
I think that would be helpful. One of the frustrations again with the police policies was that they're not sort of immediately public. I think that those policies should be. And moving forward with how we are looking at the options, can you point us to, other than San Francisco, other cities that we can look to as having policies to model, best practices, that sort of thing, other than?
Well, I mean, this area, it's easy to say, look to other areas. Other areas are having these same discussions like we're having. So this is the gold standard of what we want to get to, because this is how we're accountable and transparent to the public. So a lot of other agencies like Wisconsin created a state law that basically has a group of investigative bodies directed by the prosecutor in that jurisdiction, but that's a state law. So it depends on that area and what they do with how they create that. Here we have local control, so we can look to how we locally can hold police accountable with this new investigative body. What I did was took San Francisco, which was surprisingly similar in how their structure of their police as well as their office, and said this was a model that best fit our situation. So that's why I looked to them, because as you know, many cities are fighting just to even have a discussion. So we can't really look to a lot of these different areas, but I know, and I've consulted with many of my colleagues, they're fighting because they get pushback from police unions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to be honest with you, that's the biggest lobbyist against any issues with this. And so we have to basically, as a city, say we hold police accountable like you hold anybody else accountable, and it's up to the legislative body locally under local control to do that.
Looking at what we currently have, the powers that the Circuit Attorney's Office has to investigate, those powers are bestowed upon the Circuit Attorney's Office by the state of Missouri, am I right? Does the Circuit Attorney's Office currently have subpoena power over the police department, and is this something that's exercised often in these cases?
I mean, it depends on it's a case-by-case situation, but as we stand, we can't subpoena stuff that we don't know exists.
Sure.
So at the very least, we don't want to start using a tool heavy-handed to fracture the already strained relationships that we have. We try to wait and give them, like you heard, these are complex cases and we understand that. But usually as we keep basically nagging the police and requesting this evidence, then eventually when they decide, they would turn it over. But they still have the ultimate authority to decide whether or not to turn over evidence or not. And that's the problem.
In kind of thinking through what would be required, is there additional powers that your office would require to conduct these? In addition to the staffing, are there additional authority that is required to be able to conduct effective investigations? And how would that go through the state of Missouri?
I think it would go to the local legislator to create a legislative investigative body that would have the investigative powers of the police officers, and it would be housed in my office, directed by the circuit attorney. So that's where that structure would change, where they would have the powers of the police. They would be able to investigate. They would have arrest powers. They would go through trainings of the police department. But those individuals, the 5 individuals, will be directed by us. They're not part of the police. They're part of the circuit attorney's office. They will have to go through extensive training with ballistics, DNA analysis, crime scene analysis. So this is specific training that even if you look at how the Force Investigation Unit was created, they receive those types of trainings that they need to look at these complex scenes. So I think that we had 5 positions that we can take and have those 5 positions that will be police officers, but they will be specifically dedicated to the circuit attorney's office, directed by the circuit attorney's office.
Does the St. Louis City Board of Aldermen have the authority to grant authority to an investigative unit such as that, or again, does that have to come through the state legislature?
I believe so.
I'm looking for guidance on, can we, within our municipal,
From my understanding in conversations with the board's attorney.
I mean, I have the power right now to investigate, like we investigate at homicide scenes. We go to homicide scenes right now, and we go and we work together. But in these cases, we need to have an independent investigative body that can control the scene, directed by us. Just like we, in some instances, direct these homicide investigations to make sure we have a stronger, case against the individual. So this will be no different than what we do currently. So I believe I already have the authority as the lead prosecutor in the local jurisdiction to investigate, but I want to create this independent investigative body that is directed, not directed by the police, directed by my office. That's the only thing different.
one of the concerns that I brought up in our hearing with Captain Warnicki was this conflict of interest. And within our police department, we have a lot of policing runs in families. You have former colleagues and partners, et cetera, and that sort of thing. But the circuit attorney's office works closely with our police department, and we do have to have a collaborative prosecuting office and police department. So I would hope that a conflict of interest policy with only a very small staff of 5 investigators, looking at a conflict could present a significant reduction in manpower for.
Well, no, I think if we create this independent investigative body that is not connected to even my office or the police department, directed by us, one, the individual attorneys, for example, we already have a deputy assistant circuit attorney, Mr. Robert Steele, who is over these investigations right now. He is a former public defender for over 27 years. So we are taking individuals with a varied background that are not welded to the prosecutor's basically landscape of this close relationship with the police. I'm gonna separate this office from all the other investigations, so they will not be handling cases in any other capacity but involved in officer-involved shooting cases. So their capacity is gonna be basically limited in who has access, and we're gonna take time to hire the right people, because it takes a variety of skills, not just a prosecutor standpoint or a defense standpoint, to deal with these complex cases. So these are the individuals that are not career prosecutors, may have some prosecutor experience, but not welded to the current system as we have it. And that's why we need this independent investigative body. We will have a conflict of interest policy where in terms of, we will ask questions in terms of relationships and different things, because we want them to be independent, and they're gonna be directly reported to me, no one else.
Is there any funding available is this going to have to be something that's funded just by the city of St. Louis? Is there state funding? Is there federal grants? Are there any other,
We're gonna have to fund this locally, and I've made a suggestion that we take 0.1% of the total police budget annually and dedicate it to this unit, because if you see, we have one case for 900,000. So I think that it's imperative that we have accountability in these cases, because this starts the conversation of how we can best deploy training and different issues to save the city money over the long term. And when you have this independent investigations, they have basically, studies have shown that these type of cases go down because there's accountability.
And my last question would just be, so we're looking at police-involved shootings where it's a fatal shooting, that there have been.
Fatal
30
or non-fatal?
Fatal and non-fatal. How many non-fatal shootings took place? Is this anytime a weapon is discharged, or is it when a victim is, when there is a victim that's been
Well,
shot?
weapons is discharged and not shot. We don't consider that an
No.
officer-involved shooting case. But if a weapon is shot and someone is hit, or if it's shot and someone is not hit, if it's just basically pulled out, those are not an officer-involved shooting. Someone has to be shot, they can be critically injured or not. We look at those cases, and we also looking with this new unit, conviction integrity, because it goes to the integrity of other cases involved in these issues. So we're also wrapping up conviction integrity in these cases.
It was clear in our last hearing that there's there's some discretion on the part of the police department on which cases they want to investigate with this FIU. And it is not all police-involved shootings, but those with serious injuries. So I think there would need to be some level, I mean, I don't know how many police-involved shootings that were non-fatal in nature and non-serious in nature took place last year, but maybe a clarification on what that.
I think about, 4 or 5 took
There were-
place? About 4 out of
Well-
the 16.
So there were 16 police officer-involved shootings last year,
4 were non-fatal.
4 were
or 5.
non-fatal.
4 or 5, but don't quote me on that. We can get you the exact, but it's around 4 or 5. It's not
The
that many.
majority of police-involved shootings ended in fatalities.
Yes.
That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for.
Alderman Muhammad.
Thank you, Alderman. The worst thing about being a freshman is every question gets answered before you have the opportunity to ask. Thank you, Circuit Attorney. I think this is a serious issue, and I stand behind you and your office 100%. I do have a question, but I think, Mr. Shepherd, you may be the one to answer it. In regards to creating an independent investigation unit strictly under the Circuit Attorney's office, now, how would that look from the Board of Aldermen legislatively? So if we do a board bill, it can be repealed in 2 years. So it would take a charter change to make it long-term and make it permanent and more concrete.
Yes, I mean, that'd be great. We do an ordinance, it could be repealed, or the money could be taken out of the budget or anything like that.
So would it be a public safety issue, or would it be a appropriations issue? Would it come from public safety or Ways and Means?
It's, as far as the board bill, it could come from either. It's gonna have to go through ENA for the appropriation to happen.
Mhm.
But it could go through public safety or Ways and Means. Yeah.
Got it. I have no further questions, Alderman.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Thank you, Attorney Kim Gardner, Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner, and you gave a very powerful report, and I agree with you on it. The question that I have is, one, the Force Investigative Unit, Internal Affairs, both of those are under the police. Both of them investigate themselves. So why do we need both of them?
Well, I think that you look at the Force Investigation Unit, and that's a very good question. They deal with the criminal investigation portion, and Internal Affairs deals with the administrative portion of it. So the firing, or if someone has to, be taken off, or those employment issues, that's what Internal Affairs deals with.
Okay.
So that's the difference in those two entities.
Okay, and then the other thing that I kept hearing continuously is trust and accountability. So I guess my question is, when we support this and make this happen, how is that gonna change that part? Because I'm hearing you loud and clear, you still waiting on information to come from almost a year ago that you've never received. So how is that gonna change of you receiving the information to handle those cases, to make it a speedy process, and to be able for the community to be clear on where things are standing and be transparent?
Well, first of all, I would control the investigation from the actual incident. No longer am I waiting till after things are, investigated, however long that takes. I will be there in the process from the initial incident controlling the scene. Whoever controls the scene controls the information as well as the investigation, as well as the process. And so I think that's leading to that trust and accountability because, you know, like you heard from Alderman Kotar, these cases are complex. They're gonna take a long time depending on that case. But I think that we will have a better answer for the community where this case is at. Right now, I can't truly give you a true answer of where the case is at. All I can is say that it's being investigated, and that's it. But how it's being investigated, what is being investigated, when completion, I'm basically left to the decision-making of the Force Investigation Unit. And the trust means, well, when you are the entity that is investigating your own people who work in the office, the implicit bias just in the outlook sends a message to the community. So even if they're not doing the things that some people in the community may think, but we have no community trust in the whole law enforcement system, the criminal justice system, even my office, because people think automatically, right now, I get all this information. You probably thought, oh, I'm got all this information. I have all this stuff that I can release stuff, and that's not the case. So it's really educating the community as well as elected officials so we can answer those tough questions for our constituencies as well as be accountable to the public. And I think that this is a way that we can do this. Now, this is not guarantee the outcome for anybody, but this is a fair process, and that's always better than not having a fair process from the get-go.
Right. And so my next question is to the chair. When we get clarity on which way we would go to support this and to make it happen, will we have an MOU in there for the police department and circuit attorney office, or is that even feasible to have that, or?
In answer to it, it may, but that would depend upon exactly how any legislation is written.
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's all I have, thank you.
Alderman Boyd, Jeffrey Boyd, do you have any questions?
I do. You may have already answered it, so I apologize. We had a marathon meeting in the streets, but it was a productive meeting. It was very productive. Last week when we talked to Major Warner, we had talked about how many cases the Force Investigator had sent over to the Circuit Attorney's Office. Have you already talked about that?
Yes.
Okay. So,
I have a total of 25 cases.
okay, 25 cases.
Yes.
And how many have been cleared?
I know the last time before I took office, Jennifer Joyce cleared 4. We have 11 currently open, plus we have 14 that took place in 2017 that I have no reports. So these are 25 total that are not cleared yet.
Okay. And it was my understanding from last week, from the major, that your office no longer want to do concurrent investigations.
No, I think that was a mischaracterization of what we do. I gave an overview that, prior to me taking office, Jennifer Joyce, around 2014, started to say she will investigate these cases by reviewing what the police, basically, when they finish their investigation, they would turn over so she could take a look to decide if criminal charges are appropriate. Well, after 2014, 2015, after the Mansour Ball Bay case, she decided that because these cases are taking so long, even now they're taking long, she decided to have what's called a parallel investigation. Well, a parallel investigation means, yeah, we go to the scenes, but it's not truly parallel and independent because the Force Investigation Unit controls the scene, controls how we can look in the scene or enter the scene, as well as how evidence is collected. So what we found in 2017, that we have 14 open cases. We have not received one Force Investigation Unit completed report. And by the way, this takes time, so I'm not saying this is something out of the ordinary, but we're asking for an independent investigative body directed by the Circuit Attorney's Office to address controlling the scene, address collection of evidence, address transparency and accountability to the public, as well as what criminal charges we can pursue. At the same time, the police department will be ancillary to helping us send evidence to the crime lab, do ETU, different things, help us take pictures, but we are directing that initial investigation, as well as we want 4 prosecutors that are solely charged with evaluating and directing these cases. So that's
Right.
what we're asking for.
So talk me through an incident, based on how the Force Investigation Unit is working with the Circuit Attorney's Office right now. So let's suppose that, 10 o'clock this morning, there was a officer involved shooting, it was a fatality. Talk me through what's happening as far as the Circuit Attorney's role in that situation.
So first of all, there's a pager that the police department has allowed us to have we have one attorney who's around the clock 24/7. So every time there's any officer involved shooting, we're alerted. We go to the scene, no matter what time of day or night. Once we go to the scene, as I said, the Force Investigation Unit controls the scene area. They control what pictures to take. Now, we are able to, depending on who is there at the scene to allow us to do certain things, we are able to take pictures. If we see witnesses, we do go out and interview and do our own kind of independent investigation of get the story, but we don't have any information. Sometimes we don't even know what happened other than if we get the public safety statement from the chief, that is it. So we are basically charged with looking at the scene, kind of looking at if it's volatile. Sometimes it's too volatile to ask people questions. You don't want to go up with an investigator and CAO and start asking questions. People become, difficult sometimes or don't want to talk at that time. We knock on doors, we do follow-up, but the actual scene, and they do allow us sometimes, depending on a case-by-case situation, to take pictures. We're supposed to be able to go back when they have interviewed us suspects, but we found that sometimes our prosecutor is waiting, and all of a sudden they say, oh, the person has been interviewed without the circuit attorney being there. So there's issues in terms of the flow of information. As in other cases, we usually, as a routine, as the police basically have evidence, they turn it over. Where in these cases, we have to specifically request every piece of evidence on a regular day-to-day basis. So you have to kind of nag them to get information. And if they decide not to turn this information over, we never get it. And as of January 2017, I took office, we have 14 cases. We have not one piece of evidence or Force Investigation Unit report to date.
Okay, let me ask you this. You said, depending on the situation, or sometime you're allowed to take pictures and be part of the crime scene. What dictates whether you can or not? Is it the commander on site?
No, it's the Force Investigation Unit personnel at the scene, depending on how they engage with our office or if they feel like it's appropriate, they control the scene. So they can say, you can't go over here, you're coming into the scene.
Okay.
Sometimes they'll let us in depending on that circumstance and depending on the relationship. So that's what I mean. It's case by case.
Well, let me ask you this. So are you considered a law enforcement officer?
I'm the chief law enforcement officer
Okay,
of the city of St. Louis.
so your assistant prosecutors, are they considered the same?
Yes, but when we talk about the roles, we don't do the investigation. And
Right.
currently, the police control the scene, and they can control how far we go into that scene. Now, we have developed a protocol where we try to work together, but like I
Right.
said, it's based on a
Right,
case
but
by
you're not a
case.
citizen, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around. You are the chief law enforcement officer, but a police officer can tell you stay out of this scene, but another police officer can walk around the scene.
Yes. As a-
But you are the top law enforcement officer, so how does that make sense?
Well, you gotta ask the police chief and the police department who created the Force Investigation Unit and address those issues. Because
Okay.
that's more for them.
Okay, thank you, no further questions.
GP.
Alderman Gracia, did you have any?
That would be great
Question.
if you, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, then, we'll go ahead with you.
Thanks for your time today. This is a,
Oh, I'd like to do one other thing before you
Yeah.
do. I just want to recognize Representative Josh Peters, who's also. Okay, if you would.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here. Obviously, an important conversation. Right now, since you are down a number of attorneys, are you able to utilize the money that's sitting there that's allocated for salaries and benefits? Or are you expecting to fill those?
No, we're expecting to fill those, and those positions are going to be filled, and they're being filled currently.
Okay.
So this unit is specific to officer-involved shooting, so we don't want to take resources away from one part of the already suffering office to address this more complex issue.
Okay, and then, it's been my experience, and this is anecdotal, so I'm hoping you have better information, but some of the investigators for the Circuit Attorney's Office that I think have been hired in the past tend to have been law enforcement officers, so I'm assuming this is a different skill set. Okay, and then for use of force, would you be investigating non-lethal, not just shootings, but tasers, other things like that?
And that's what, that's where we get into the policy and nitty gritty of how we address use of force, but I would think that we address even non-lethal use of force cases also.
Okay, and then the 4th through Ferguson report, mentions many times about how people of color in the region do not have confidence in either the police departments or the court system. And so their recommendations with respect to use of force were for the Attorney General to serve as a special prosecutor in the Missouri Highway Patrol to investigate use of force. And have you had conversations with respect to maybe why those recommendations in this report don't make the most sense? And if you could articulate maybe.
Well, I think when you look at the Ferguson report that happened in 2000 and
came out in October 2015,
but the incident was addressed in 2014, and everybody, like I said before, we're in a time of criminal justice reform. So many times people automatically go to, we need an independent investigative body. Now, from day one when I ran for office, I believe that we should have an independent investigative body directed by the local prosecutor, because the local prosecutor is held accountable. They're held accountable by the people. They're put in office by the people. So to me, in some instances, it is up to the local prosecutor to decide whether that case may be best suited with the Attorney General, but it starts with the local prosecutor. Even if people say they want an independent investigative special prosecutor to look at this. But I think that what we have to look at is how we are accountable. The Attorney General is not accountable for the city of St. Louis. I am, and I feel more than confident with an independent and fair investigation directed by my office that we can accomplish the accountability and transparency that I think when you look at the Ferguson report, that was the ground zero of the discussion we're having today. And the discussion has grown from 2014 when the Mike Brown incident took place to 2017. So I believe that was a thought that they couldn't even forecast what we have right now. And that's what we're dealing with now from the Ferguson report on, and this serious issues of officer-involved shootings and how we best handle these.
Okay. Have you had conversations with anybody from the Ferguson Commission or the Highway Patrol or Attorney General's office?
Well, I was a state legislator, and I've went through the Ferguson report, stood up on the House floor about supporting issues in the Ferguson report. I even supported the legislative, if the people in my jurisdiction wanted an independent prosecution. But at the same time, as a prosecutor, I stood up and said, hey, we also need to make it the responsibility of that local elected official who is charged with accountability of the people to look at these. So I think that that's a good idea, but I always said we need to think through it. Because in the instance, now if I say an independent prosecutor, and this was a recommendation put out by MAPA, who was against the independent prosecution, if I kick it to someone else, I'm kicking it to Bob McCullough. So people were saying, what? And I'm like, yeah. So when you say an independent prosecutor, if you have a system and other systems have a system of kicking it to someone else, that at some point the local prosecutor needs to be accountable. And I think that this independent investigative body embodies the true sentiments of the Ferguson report and how this issue has developed over time.
Okay. And then lastly, just with respect to some of the other recommendations, I know that you are obviously have a lot on your plate, but I mean, have you had conversations with anybody at the state legislature, especially because of your past relationships there, on like use of force for fleeing suspects or the use of force database or a number of the other items that were outlined in the report?
Yes, not to cut you off, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
As a state legislator, I don't know if I'm a Democrat, so I'm not trying to make it political. We're in a Republican-controlled House when I took office back in my tenure, 4 years term. Now we're in a Republican-controlled area. I've stood up on the floor and talked about the proliferations of laxing the gun laws, what this would do to drive up our officer-involved shootings. I talked about how we need our use of force laws to be in line to protect individuals' rights and liberties as a prosecutor. And even in those conversations, when we had a Democratic governor, Democratic Attorney General, those issues were basically in the same box of you're against police versus anyone else. And I tell people as a prosecutor, we have to be accountable. We have to have the public trust in terms of how we we look at these cases. And what we've done over this time since the Ferguson report, we have eroded the criminal justice system trust completely. When you look at how we prosecute cases, many people say, well, how is it that we are in the city of St. Louis, we have jurors of 12 people, and they can let go a murderer? Well, the number one issue, when we ask jurors what they're talking about, they talk about police credibility. I mean, so, and I tell police officers, the juries in our city of St. Louis are basically scrutinizing a police officer more than a defendant that murdered someone. And at some point, when we look at how we pursue justice and how we're accountable, this goes to the very heart of trust and how we hold anybody accountable in our criminal justice system. So this is a complex issue, and it impedes its way into be holding anyone accountable in a case that you would think would be a slam dunk.
Right.
But we have to call in question how we are accountable to the community in terms of better policing, community engagement, how the prosecutor's office has taken a role since I've been here and previous to engender trust. But it's a fight and it's an uphill battle, because this conversation of you anti-police or you pro-police, because I understand the sentiments of what's going on in the community, it's about doing the right thing. And in doing the right thing, you're gonna make the community mad and you're gonna make the police mad. But at the end of the day, we're guided by laws of the Constitution of this country and the laws of the state of Missouri, and that is my job. My job is not to guarantee any outcome. My guarantee is to guarantee a fair process, and I stand by that. I took an oath. I look at my oath every day, and I will move forward as the prosecutor in the city of St. Louis. But it's time for us as a community to stop this divisive conversation, pro-police against police. I know many good police officers. It's many police officers who tell me they're tired of the rhetoric even inside the police department, because it's either you with them or you against us. It should be no question.
I think we've all at
It
this
should be
table
no question.
experienced that.
It's
Yeah.
no question. I mean, just even with even saying you feel the sentiments of people and the issues that people out in the community. You're anti-police. That's a conversation that we need to have. The news media around here that I see, recording this conversation to address. Let's be about making our city whole. Hold individuals accountable who pray and violate the laws of anyone in the city of St. Louis, even police officers. Let's be accountable, like we are accountable for anybody else. And let's start having real conversations, because when we have conversations, and you'll have police union, and it's not directed to you or anybody else on this panel, when you have conversations with police union, police representatives, they automatically say the system is against police officers. Name me one case in this jurisdiction has a police officer been wrongfully convicted for murder in this jurisdiction, in any police case prior to me, with me. Name a case. They can't. Okay, matter of fact, name one around the country has a police officer been wrongfully convicted of a murder. You can't. So when we look at accountability is not about the outcome. Accountability is giving individuals the opportunity to say that there is an independent look, a fair look at these cases, and it's not directed by the police department, because the conflict of interest of when you have to pick sides, that's a heavy burden for the FIU to have to deal with, picking a side. I'm not saying they may not be picking a side, but the appearance is enough that we have to change, and that's not best practices.
Thanks for all the work you're doing, and thanks for your time today. I appreciate it.
Okay. Were there any other questions of Circuit Attorney right now? Okay. If not, we thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
We also have, Lieutenant Engelhardt here, if you would.
Okay.
Thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it.
I'm sorry I'm gonna have to leave, but thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
I think a few of our committee members had a question for the lieutenant who's here.
How you doing?
Oh, your whole expression changed when I said that.
Oh, man. Okay.
You've been standing up this whole time, too.
A little bit, yeah, but it's okay.
A couple of our members just had a question for you. If you just take a seat.
Sure.
I know you weren't necessarily expecting it.
I can talk about force investigation all day long.
Alderman Boyd, you had a...
Sure.
You're the most senior.
but can you again just tell everybody who you are and what you do?
I'm Lieutenant Roger Engelhardt. I'm the commander of the Force Investigation Unit.
Okay. Lieutenant Engelhardt, I'm gonna give you the same scenario I gave the circuit attorney. So at 10 o'clock, there's an officer involved shooting. What's going on with the police department?
Usually I receive a telephone call, usually from either the command post or communications, or sometimes even the a commander on the scene who has my cell number call me and say, hey, we got a officer involved shooting. Depending upon what time of day it is, I'm either responding from my home or wherever. Tends to always happen that way. I notify my team and we respond to the scene usually. Now, while that's happening, I'm in communication with the supervisor on the scene, because sometimes the person shot's being transported to a hospital, or to just kind of get an understanding of what we're walking into. You know, and I give some basic instructions, you know, sequester, make sure that the witnesses are sequestered, make sure the officers are sequestered, and we respond to the scene. Sometimes if, you know, an officer's injured, or if obviously the person shot's injured and he's transported, I'll direct detectives to respond to the hospital to interview either or. But that's kind of as I'm responding. When I get there, the scene's usually secured for me. I try to identify as quickly as possible the involved officer. Okay, and that's kind of a technical term. Excuse me. When I say the involved officer, that's the officer who actually fired his weapon, or that we believe did the shooting. Okay, so when you hear me say involved officer, that's what I'm speaking of. Sequester him. I get what's called a public safety statement from him. Okay, and that's basically a statement he doesn't have to give it, but it's not constitutionally protected. He has to tell me which way he shot, which way they shot at him. Is there anybody else injured? Who's injured? Is there any dangerous things around like guns? And is there anybody wanted or still at large that we need to be aware of? And that's basically, as the statement says, public safety, to ensure that bullets miss, they go through windows, they go through doors. So we need to make sure that there's not other victims of this exchange of gunfire, that all the injuries are being treated, that there's no dangerous things laying around, and if there's a person, if there's a shootout with multiple people, that one of the suspects, we identify that person to broadcast that, so an officer doesn't walk up on someone who was just involved in a shootout with other officers, and that would be obviously dangerous to that officer, so, and to the community. So that happens first, okay? The witnesses are sequestered. You know, I try to identify which witnesses do we have. The officers, as soon as practical and possible, I have them transported to my office. Supervisors required to go with them. Sometimes there's multiple officers involved in the shooting. I send a supervisor with them for a couple of reasons. First of all, so there's some accountability and control, so there's not collusion between the officers. And also there's some practical things that need to be done there as well. We have a EMS respond, do a wellness check of the officer to make sure, because these incidents are traumatic. Some officers we found after these incidents, have some medical issues, and so we make sure we take care of those medical issues. They're also required to, this is an administrative process, not part of the criminal investigation per se, they're required to give a drug test and alcohol test. So we have an agency respond, and they do that test, administrative test. Also, there's a post-traumatic team to talk to the officers, because there's, sometimes there's some psychological issues associated with these events, okay? The witnesses, it just all depends on what's most practical. Most ideal situation is to transport them to the homicide office. Homicide office is equipped with rooms that there's the audio-visual recording, and they're recorded all the time, so it's recorded from the moment he enters the room. If there's other suspects that are arrested, they would also be transported to homicide. Preferably, I like to transport those witnesses in cars with in-car cameras, So the in-car cameras are on as we're transporting those witnesses to again show that there's no collusion, that there's no witness tampering, either by the officers transporting them or whatever. So preferably, I like to use in-car cameras to transport witnesses. That's not always practical. Once they're there, the interview process begins. They're interviewed. Sometimes interviews take some time. Sometimes, not so much. It just all depends. We photograph the officer to demonstrate how he appeared. Sometimes, especially with detectives and things like that, whether or not this person that was confronted, could he reasonably believe that that was a police officer and not someone else? So we photographed the officer in the clothing they were wearing at the time of the incident. So like I said, sometimes it's uniformed officers, which is not as big of an issue, but undercover officers it is, especially when they're getting out of plane cars and things like that. So we photographed them. We also count down their weapons to see how many rounds they fired, and who fired what, and how many rounds they fired. We seize those weapons. And then as far as the scene goes, we direct the processing of the scene. We identify evidence, that we believe is evidence based upon experience and those issues. And we direct ETU to seize those evidence. Sometimes these scenes are spread out. Sometimes it's practical to do a neighborhood canvass that night. Sometimes it's not. It just all depends. We're the only agency with this scanner you guys bought from me. Actually, it was bought on a grant. You guys did appropriate the money first, but we bought it with a grant. And that records the crime scene. We're the only agency in the state of Missouri that has that machine. Usually, just depends, we schedule an interview for the officer. And I know there's been some discussion about sleep cycles and things like that.
Tell me about the circuit attorney role with this parallel investigation. How does that work?
Okay. As far as the circuit attorney, initially this policy was written, and I helped write a big part of it. It's written into the policy that they are the independent review of these investigations. My reports do not offer any opinions. My reports just present all the facts that I have. They make the determination whether there's criminal liability or not. That's their role. That's their role in the system.
Right, but when they come, so you said the command post calls you, or someone, the commander on the scene will call you, right?
Right.
And the circuit attorney says they get a text message, a text or pager goes off, something like that.
Right.
So who's contacting the circuit attorney's office?
Well, the pager story is the police department gave me a pager.
Okay.
Now, when these happen, I'm making a lot of phone calls, I'm doing a lot of things, and sometimes it was not in my immediate thought process, I gotta call the circuit attorney's office. So to make sure it didn't happen anymore, I gave them my pager.
Okay.
So that's how they got the pager, because I wanna make sure that they know.
So when they get to the scene, are they authorized to canvass the scene, take photographs, or do whatever any other police officer would be doing? Or do you direct them with only certain limited tasks?
I don't direct them at all. Usually, when they arrive, I greet them. Usually they arrive after I've been on the scene for sometimes hours. And I direct them through the scene and tell them what I understand about the scene. I identify the witnesses that we've located. I tell them who the officers are that are involved. And I invite them to witness any of the interviews of any of the people involved. And what's great about the homicide section and the way it's set up there is they can watch those interviews on closed circuit TV. They can bring them up on the computer and watch the interviews. I've even suggested, that they text the officers who are doing the interviews, if they have a question or something like that. It's just up to them what they do. Sometimes they stay for that, sometimes they don't. And that's, basically, they're as involved. I try to share with them everything that I can share with them at the scene.
Is there anything you could think of that would help make the relationship stronger, cases better with the relationship with the circuit attorney's office and the police department?
We had a good relationship. There was an attorney over there, Cynthia Copeland, who I worked with, and she was the point person from the circuit attorney's office for officer-involved shootings. Since she left, well, as she was leaving, I was called to a meeting, and I was introduced to an attorney who was gonna be the new point person. I was since told that she was not the point person. When these and I've asked multiple times, who is the point person? Who has this stuff? With Cynthia Copeland was there, we would talk probably almost every day or every other day, especially in the short period after a shooting. And I would share with her whatever issues there were with the case. I would share with her CD, whatever interviews we had. I would share with her those CDs. I would tell her basically, give her an update as the case was unfolding, what was going on with the investigation. So there was really good communication then, and the office is obviously being restructured, but I don't have a point of contact.
Okay, thank you, Lieutenant.
Were there any other members that have questions?
I do.
We'll take it by seniority. Alderman Conley?
Thank you. I'm curious, Lieutenant, I know you were standing outside of the conference room, so I'm not sure how much of the circuit attorney's statement
I heard some
and
of it.
question you were able to hear. But the circuit attorney's office is recommending that we have an independent unit within the circuit attorney's office that has investigative authority over the scene whenever there's an officer-involved shooting. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts in terms of the process, like how that would work? Do you have questions about it? Do you have,
Well, yeah, there's, these cases are kind of sprawling. I have 4 detectives, and most of the time that's not enough. I have to outsource a lot of efforts, pulling other detectives to do that work. I can't imagine that she would be able to do it any differently. So there's never gonna be this divorce of the police department and the circuit attorney's office. It would just be impossible. There's, even with the 4 detectives I have, it's not enough. I outsource the seizure of video to the cybercrime section because I believe they're the best at seizing video. Not only they understand what I want seized, because it's not just as important to seize the video, but also the metadata that creates the video. So we can authenticate the video, so we can, and there's certain things that we can draw out of information on that video if we have that metadata, but if that metadata is not seized, then we can't do it. So I outsource that to the cybercrime section, actually to a few people there because they understand how to do that. As far as the seizure of evidence, or I've attended, I've done this job for 27 years. I've attended almost every school that you can go to on officer-involved shooting and behavioral science. And that helps guide me in the seizure of evidence and things like that. I think there would have to be a time to transition into that. Because the important part is that we come to the best understanding of what happened. And then from that understanding, then judgments can be made. But if we don't first come to the best understanding, then it's impossible to make good judgments. So I think, just in a practical matter, I don't think there'll ever be a wholly independent, because we need them and they need us. So I don't see how that's ever really gonna work. There is a level of expertise to this, and I don't know where they would find those people. She mentioned San Francisco, San Diego. It's more rare that the circuit attorneys or the prosecutor attorney does these investigations. Force investigation unit model that we have is becoming the norm throughout the nation. There is San Diego County. Their prosecutors do the investigation as well, like I guess what she was proposing with the San Francisco model. But even in those models, if you look at who's doing the investigation, it's retired cops or cops. So
Yeah,
you're never gonna
So I was
separate.
actually going to ask the circuit attorney this, and unfortunately, you know, well, but I am curious, your familiarity with the circuit attorney's office. I mean, obviously, you've been doing this a long time. So the Ford through Ferguson report, you know, actually suggests that the State Highway Patrol investigate, you know, these particular cases.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Philip Gregory, Lieutenant Philip Gregory is the person who would do that. The issue with him is he's in Jackson, Missouri. So if, and actually me and Lieutenant Gregory have a gentleman's agreement, if a trooper, and especially it's relevant now because we have troopers on the highway, how we're gonna process the scene. Because, you know, he obviously has jurisdiction statewide or on any state highway, but it's impractical because it's gonna take him, best case scenario, an hour and a half to get here. So,
Do they not have, Troop C is based in St. Charles?
yes.
So do they not have folks in St. Charles that?
Well,
would be
again,
amenable?
there is some expertise to these investigations. And the Highway Patrol recognizes that as well. So Lieutenant Gregory he's the me of eastern half of Missouri who does that.
Okay.
All right.
And I'm not as familiar with the State Patrol because we haven't had the pleasure of working with them very much in the city. Troop C, is that the troop that's
I believe so.
patrolling our
I
highways?
believe so. I'm not
Yeah.
Highway Patrol. I believe that's true.
Okay. So,
But again, with him, and we've actually had an incident, a trooper working at the casino shot somebody. And so we had the incident, and it kind of worked. You know, we kind of controlled the scene. You know, I kind of advised him what was going on. The good thing about that particular scene was it was in the parking garage, so it was easy to contain and control. If a scene is more dynamic, where there is some public safety issues with, you know, hey, let's get this done and get out of here, situation, you know, that's where we would be more, you know, we're gonna have to break this thing down, you know, this is what I got, these are the people, what do you want, you know, do you want me to interview him, do you want to, you know, so we have this kind of gentleman's agreement that we're gonna kind of work it out, because the practicality is that he is a minimum of an hour and a half away.
okay. So, and I guess my last question, if I may, or it might be a series of questions related to this particular instance, but, you know, most of the conversation today has, you know, revolved around use of force pertaining to a weapon being discharged, a gun specifically. But what about, you know, instances of pepper spray, mace, you know, or other, you know, tools that police use that could be considered weapons? I mean, how are those cases being investigated, or are they being investigated?
Well, currently, and the police department policy is, my unit only investigates where somebody is struck by gunfire, or whatever the chief tells me to do. In custody deaths, where there's force applied or could have been force applied, we'll do those cases too, and just whatever he says I should do. You know, since we're talking about redoing a system, other departments investigate any use of force. The force investigation unit investigates all uses of force as a criminal matter, or any use of an impact weapon they might investigate. There's some theory, and one I kind of agree with, is that we should investigate all officer-involved shootings, even if we don't strike someone, because if the goal is to get a better understanding of tactics and decision-making of those officers, whether somebody's struck by the gunfire is just a consequence of that decision. But if we're, as an agency, trying to get better at making those decisions, like why did this officer make that decision he made, whether he hit somebody or not, you know, if we look at them all, maybe we'll get better. Professor Klinger, he did a study on the St. Louis Police Department on all shots fired, okay, and I think there's some validity to that, but then you end up into the practical part of it. Like, you would take, you know, 16 investigations to turn into 45, which we need, so we need a bigger unit, we need more resources. So there's a practical side of this thing too. But as far as, use of pepper spray and stuff like that, those
Or
are.
even plastic bullets, rubber bullets. I
Right,
mean,
those,
you know, I
those
mean-
wouldn't be under mine unless I was told to. Which,
Okay.
I mean, the chief could tell me
and the
to,
reason
but
I
the
asked-
internal affairs would investigate those if a complaint's made.
So, do you report up through internal affairs, or are you independent of internal affairs?
Independent by design, because I frankly, policy doesn't really mean anything to me. Whether they violate a policy, it's whether, it's to do the criminal investigation of the event. It's important to have that separation, so the officers know that this is a criminal investigation, this is an internal investigation. I make it very clear to them when I interview them, that that I'm investigating you, and that this statement will be given to the Circuit Attorney's Office and the Justice Department, and they're gonna use that statement against you, kinda like a Miranda warning.
So the FIU is currently, I was left with the impression after the major came forward last week, and we had the policy that was given to us. And then the policy did specifically spell out when it's appropriate to use, things like rubber bullets or pepper spray, mace. But if those are deployed as, or whenever the case may warrant, your unit is not investigating that.
My unit's not, unless
Unless
I'm
directed
asked
by
to.
the,
If they
unless
ask me
directed
to,
by the chief.
I do whatever I'm told.
Right.
Well, mostly.
Yeah. I think that's all the questions that I have for the moment. Thank you very much for your time. Alderman Hubbard.
I just wanted to ask, the circuit attorney mentioned that there were instances where information wasn't readily shared, or they would come onto the scene and I guess maybe they wouldn't be welcomed, or they wouldn't be privy to really what's going on. Are you aware of any situations where that has occurred?
That's never occurred.
I wish she was still sitting right here, because I just.
That's never occurred.
I would just like
And
to
in
hear
her
the
defense,
exchange.
in her defense, Kim Gardner's never been at a scene.
Well,
So
maybe
when-
some of her staff personnel.
Right,
who were-
her staff, I can tell you without a doubt, every scene that I've been on, I've welcomed them, I've shown them anything they wanted to see. I've identified any witnesses, identified any issues that I thought were with the officer, this particular officer, Bob shooting, as I saw it at the scene. Without a doubt, I cooperate completely with the Circuit Attorney's Office in these scenes, even so much as we hold the scenes waiting for them before we pick up evidence. Because I want them to see the scene, and I want them to understand the scene. Okay, on very, very few occasions, and it was usually because there was, the scene was getting dangerous, and I said, I'm gonna show you stuff and I'm gonna show you quick, but, and that was agreed upon. But there's never been for instance, any circuit attorney's office has shown up at a scene that I have not cooperated fully with them, that I am the one who gives them the tour of the scene. I identify all the witnesses that we've located. I've shown her, hey, we're gonna seize these cameras, we're gonna seize those cameras. I have never not cooperated with the Circuit Attorney's Office. I want to cooperate with the Circuit Attorney's Office. I have cooperated with the Circuit Attorney's Office. The breakdown with that cooperation happened when Cynthia Copeland left the office and I lost a point of contact. These circuit attorneys who show up at the scene, I've asked them, hey, who do I bring this stuff to? Who gets this stuff? Who wants this stuff? And they failed to identify anybody as the point person. Just today, I received a letter from Robert Steele requesting all this evidence. So I can only assume that Robert Steele is now my point of contact. And I've repeatedly asked, who is the point of contact? We need to work this out. Because we, just like I said, we have to work together. Like, there's no way, I need them, because we have to get court orders for buckle swabs. We have to get search warrants to search cell phones or cars or whatever. So we have to work together. There's never been a for instance that I haven't shared everything with the Circuit Attorney's Office. I want to share everything with the circuit attorney's office. You know, and and again, Kim Gardner is, it's just like having, when you had Major Warnicki in here. You know, she's not the person on the ground doing this stuff. Kim Gardner's not the person on the ground doing this stuff, and she's relying on what she's told, okay? And so, I can't speak to what she's been told, but I can speak for the fact that there hasn't been a scene that I've been on that a circuit attorney showed up that I haven't shared with them everything I know about that scene, even to the point of holding the scene, waiting for them to arrive. When we were done, we were waiting to break it down, but I knew they were coming, and we held the scene for them to see what was going on. So, you know, I can't say why she got that information or who she got that from, but I can tell you that has never happened while I was on the scene. And if I saw it happening, I would stop it from happening, because that is not how I do business. That is not how this should go. Again, we need, this whole thing has to work together. And whether they're the lead or I'm the lead, we still need to cooperate, because, again, my 4 detectives can't do it by themselves. We have to outsource and get help from other people. Her 4 investigators are gonna have to do the same thing, no matter what. And there has to be some kind of cooperation too, because, you know, I was a homicide guy for a long time. And I thought I knew a lot about officer-involved shootings. And I found out as I went around the country and studied that I didn't know as much as I thought I did. There's a lot of assumptions about officer-involved shootings that frankly aren't valid when the science is applied to them. So, you know, there is a level of expertise.
Alderwoman, did you have another question?
Yes,
I'm sorry.
And so, of course, that's a stark contrast to what she said, but can we agree that going forward, if that contact person is Mr. Steele or whomever, that you all will be open to sharing information?
I will share this information with anybody.
Okay.
All right, in authority, that will, as long as that sharing will not affect the investigation. Anybody from this committee wants to come over and talk to me about officer-involved shootings, you know, unfortunately or fortunately, this has become my life. So if anybody in this room wants to come over and, you know, it would take more time than we have here today, but I could try to explain my whole methodology and my whole processes and why I think they're the best processes.
Okay. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but I know everybody has
Right,
questions.
right,
and
okay.
we're trying
Well,
to-
again, I could talk about
we're
police
trying to,
shootings all day long.
Get out of here. I don't know if I would want to come and pick your brain in that way, but I think as a member of this body, I'm just more concerned with the line of communication being open. And secondly, just in the best interest of public trust, because I mean, no one in this room can deny that there is a lack of trust with the police department and citizens. I mean, it's our reality that we need to deal with. How do you feel about policing themselves?
Well, we do it all the time.
But so, I mean, in the best interest of transparency, though, would you be open to having an independent investigation unit?
I mean, you guys decide. I mean, obviously, I think I do a good job. So if you're asking me whether I do a good job, I would say yes, I do a really good job, or at least I try to. Would I be open to it? Well, that's a decision you guys make. But as far as trust, I mean, trust has to be earned, okay? And how you earn trust is each and every time. So each and every investigation is its own test and its own trial, and I try to do the best I can with each one. I try to gather all the information I possibly can. I try to put it in a way that can be easily understood by a lay reader, and I'd evolve. Like how we did our first investigation is different than we do them now. There's certain questions that I asked that I didn't ask before. There's certain processes I didn't do that I now do. Okay, so it's an evolution, and again, about the public trust, it has to be earned. And if they take over, they're gonna have to earn it every time too. Public's not gonna automatically trust them because it's the circuit attorney's office. The police officers are not gonna automatically trust them because it's the circuit attorney's office. Trust has to be earned. And it's not just, you don't just get it because you're the circuit attorney. You don't just get it because you're the police department. or you don't lose it. Every time is its own test. And you have to be honest, and you have to try to find the truth. And everybody's goal should be the pursuit of the truth and the best understanding of what happened.
Thank you. That completes your report?
Yes.
In order, Alderman Cordray?
Thank you, Chairman. Briefly, Lieutenant, could you, I think I heard some conflicting numbers on the number of cases that your office, the Force Investigation Unit, has investigated that have been sent, final reports have been sent to the Circuit Attorney's Office. Do you know how many reports have you signed off on, completed, that have been sent to the Circuit Attorney's Office?
I don't have that information with me.
Yeah.
I can tell you that, I've given them every report. As long as they had point of contacts, there was some politicizing of when the reports were delivered before. It was more of an announcement, it was a press release when the reports were delivered before. They didn't have control of that. But, it's a little bit of a disconnect there with your question, because when this process originally started, we would complete reports, we would turn them over to the Circuit Attorney's Office. The Circuit Attorney's Office would do their review to determine any criminal liability. All right, on August 19th, there was a shooting, and the Circuit Attorney's Office unilaterally announced that they were gonna do their own independent investigation, and that they were not going to rely on my information, that they were gonna seek their own information. Okay, so, but even in the spirit of cooperation and practical manners, me and Cynthia Copeland, agreed that, that's, and on the ground level, we need to work it out between each other, because we need to make the system work. So, so then it became not so much reports were given, because they were doing their own independent investigation, or so they said. I would just supply her with everything that I had. And
So interviews, ballistics, DNA, just.
Everything.
Okay.
Everything I had would go to her. And we would talk pretty regularly about if there's any new developments in the case, any new lab reports, anything that came up, I would call her, I would give her the information. So, when you talk about turning over reports, that process kind of stopped on August 19th.
Of this year?
Of 2015.
2015.
All right, so all the information has been given to them.
August 19th, 2015 or 16? We're in 17. When did
I'm trying to
Cynthia
think. Yeah, 2015.
Okay.
2015. So, but their information has been sold, and I heard her testify that she has received no information in a year. Cynthia Copeland has a whole boatload of evidence of cases before that happened. So I don't know where that evidence went. Now, it's not the original evidence, it's copies, but she's received that information. Because before Cynthia Copeland left, in fact, Cynthia Copeland, it was a joke in my office, because she would, kind of be a pain in the butt, like she'd blow up my phone, like asking for, where's this, and we wouldn't even have it, our copies made.
Right. And as a practical matter, Roger, Lieutenant, if there's an investigation a force-involved investigation that you're currently working on that maybe happened a couple of months ago, anything you've seized into evidence, is it down in the evidence? Is it available right now to the circuit attorneys?
All evidence that we seize
is available to them.
Is
They
either
can
in-
send an investigator over
It's
to
in the-
your department or to the evidence room and get that evidence,
It's
right?
either in the lab, or it's in the property room.
And so if you have, for every investigation, there's a case number assigned, right?
Yes.
And so if the circuit attorney's office just looks up that case number, they could see every piece of evidence available under that case.
I don't know their capabilities, but I can tell you that all the evidence we seize goes immediately to the property room, and if it doesn't, then I'm up somebody's butt.
Right. Okay. I have nothing further.
Okay. Alderman Spencer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I find the numbers have been really confusing. Last week, Captain Warnicki said that there were 37 police-involved shootings investigated by the FIU, and Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner today said that she has 25. What I'd like is just definitive on the numbers, how many investigations we've done,
Okay.
how many are completed, and if it's alarming to think that none of the information is getting to the circuit attorney's office because we don't know the point of contact there. I think that needs to be, that issue needs to be alleviated tomorrow. I don't see how that could possibly be any issue whatsoever, given email and a million other ways of communication in this day and age. We ought to have a way to transport. And what I'd like to know is how many of the police-involved shooting investigations have been completed by the police department and handed over, how many have outstanding, because the circuit attorney's office had some alarming statements earlier today that a lot of the cases are open and pending information to be shared, and I find that just.
Well, I just,
Yeah,
today,
sure.
when I stopped
Sure.
by my office before I came here, there was a letter in my mailbox from Robert Steele asking for all the information from all the cases that we've done. So we're not knowing what they have or what they don't have, okay? I directed my detectives to start making copies of all the files, all the evidence, everything we have. Now, it's so much stuff, it's gonna take several weeks to put that together, okay? Our reports, on average, are, anywhere between, 170, 300 pages
Yeah.
thick.
Sure.
And multiple CDs, video CDs and things like that, and just the mechanics of making those copies takes a long period of time. Just to print our reports takes hours. So, with that request from Robert Steele, assuming that he is now my point of contact, because his name was on the bottom of the letter, I will deliver all that stuff to him. And I'm gonna start from the beginning to now, because I don't know what they have or what they don't have. And so that way, I'm sure that they have everything.
And then if we could just have an understanding of how long those take, I mean, I think if there's any outstanding ones, just for clarification, because there have been different sides of the story
Now,
kind of.
now, and
and
here,
then-
and here, it's important to differentiate between, a completed investigation. The investigations are usually completed within, for the most part, 2 or 3 weeks, with some things outstanding. A lot of the lab work takes a long time, sometimes it takes months. And, in the unfortunate situations where the person shot is deceased, the coroner's report takes some time.
Sure.
So those also add to the delay in the process.
There's no doubt they take time.
But,
and-
I'm sorry, the point I wanna make is, it's, the investigations are usually completed, but because the documentation is so enormous, what takes time is the documentation, not so much the investigation, if you understand the
Right.
difference.
One of the other alarming things I heard in the testimony earlier was this idea of our police department, the highway patrol, having a gentleman's agreement describing how scenes are secured. I think that is, we ought to have a policy in place for that, if that needs to be a state policy or something that we can direct. But I hate to rely on something that is a gentleman's agreement between yourself and another human and, specific
Those-
person. And if one person leaves, then what directs the securing of those scenes?
Usually how those things are done, how they should be done, is a memorandum, I always say this wrong.
Memorandum of understanding.
Thank you,
Well-
okay, and, to my knowledge, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, let's work on creating
So
that
that's why there is a gentleman's agreement.
Sure, so let's work on that. And then my last question is related to the conflicts of interest, something that was brought to my attention outside of our hearings, but I brought it up in our hearing with Captain Warnicki, was if there.
She's my boss, and she's a major, just so.
Sorry, I'm a
Okay.
major, I'm
All
sorry,
right.
she served as captain of the 3rd district,
I
and
let
I
that
worked
go
with her,
3
I'm so
times,
sorry.
who knows what I have to really get
No,
back.
and I
Okay.
congratulated on that, so my sincere apologies, we've been here, I've been in this room since 9 AM this morning, so
I get it.
my sincere
I get
apologies.
it.
Anyway, the question being that, we all recognize that law enforcement often runs in families. There's a close-knit relationship between officers, their partners, and extended families, et cetera. When it comes to investigating police-involved shootings, the question comes up, what about a conflict of interest? If your former partner, it's their father or their son, or there's a lot of family involved
Right,
law
we-
enforcement.
we
So
all know each
what
other.
is, yeah, exactly. So what is is there a policy in place for currently for the FIU related to conflicts of interest in those investigations, and what does that look like?
Okay,
'Cause Major Warnicki was unable to speak to that.
Okay, if there is a conflict, for example, someone from my unit is involved in an officer-involved shooting, the homicide division will handle the investigation.
What is the definition, what I'm looking for is what constitutes a conflict? What is the policy in place for that? Because, it's been brought to my attention, I mean, these are hearsay, these are issues outside of, but, I'm looking to see what the policy states on that, because I do think it could create, there could be considerable instances of a conflict of interest, and I think there needs to be a policy. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
I know exactly what you're saying.
like, so if it's a former partner, what constitutes a conflict? Because otherwise, it's sort of just very, it becomes a very discretionary.
Well, it is discretionary, and I guess maybe somebody can write a policy that, I mean, what would the policy say, though?
Yeah.
If you rode with the guy for 6 months, if you rode with him 2 days a week, if you were assigned to the same unit as him, I mean, what would the policy say? Because I've been in this job for 27 years. I know a lot of people.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, some I like, some I don't.
I know the feeling.
So I mean, but to all that, okay, that's why I welcome Circuit Attorney's Office coming out and looking. I welcome anybody looking at and reading my reports, and if you see something that you don't like, or that, in fact, a lot of things I put in my reports now were stuff based upon the public saying this is important. Now, as a criminal investigator, it's not that important to the overall finding of criminality or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand it's important to the public because they perceive that as an issue.
Mm-hmm.
So we make sure to address that issue. Like in-car cameras, for instance. We do a whole separate supplemental report dealing with in-car cameras because that's something that people are interested in. Almost always in-car cameras have no evidentiary value to the investigation. However, so instead of just, we include all that, just because people are interested and they want to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
We do a whole separate report dealing with 911 calls and callbacks of those people. So, because that's something that, people are interested in, they want to know about. And so even if it doesn't on point to with the investigation, anything that concerns you guys have as a committee that you want included in the police report. If I can do it, I'll do it, because the whole point is to earn that trust, like we talked about.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you
Just
for your
a couple
services.
quick ones.
You have a few?
Just a couple quick ones,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
Thanks for your time. Since you're running the unit, and you've had all the training that you've had, have you had time to go through the Ferguson Commission report?
I haven't read the Ferguson Commission report. I've read, many excerpts from it.
Okay.
People,
Yeah,
brought
I just,
things to my attention.
getting a little bit concerned, because no one from the police department that I've spoken with has been able to articulate any conversations that are being happening internally with respect to the
Okay.
recommendations.
Well, and a
here.
lot of that stuff is incorporated, where they don't specifically reference the Ferguson report. But a lot of, I would say almost all the training that I go to, there's a Department of Justice, conversation, which is basically information drawn out of that and other things too. So, there's a lot of information out there.
Mhm.
In fact, like before there was no information, now it's like an avalanche of information. And so, I do try to keep up on, best practices around the country. I belong to a professional society of force investigation, units made up of force investigation around the country. So to try to keep in tune with, whatever trends are happening around the country, identifying issues, that came with the investigation and how to deal with them on the front end instead of dealing with them on the back end. Because all those things, like we talked about, erodes the trust.
Okay, and how many people that you work with on the FIU are women or people of color?
I have one woman,
Mhm.
working for me. I have no people of color.
Okay,
And, there's been some things said about that, and just, I had one person, he got promoted out of my unit. And the way the collective bargaining works is people apply for my unit.
Mhm.
And I can only take those that apply. So,
Are you able, I don't know if you're allowed to tell us if you've had applications from, has it just been?
I can tell you, every African-American who's applied to my unit has been assigned to my unit,
Okay,
okay? I recognize that as an issue. Not that I think that any of these officers are lacking integrity or,
Right.
or understanding or anything like that, but I understand the public perception of that. And, I can only take those that apply to my unit.
Okay, thanks for your time and thanks for your work.
Thank you very much, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Roger.
Well, our meeting is adjourned.
Motion to adjourn.
By a tree.